sweet dreams are made of this.
When I was serving in Afghanistan, I witnessed some strange stuff. First of all, I did not see any creature but encountered some weird stuff. One of the roles I served was essentially a hearts and minds role, in that we made an effort to get to know the locals and get them to look at us in a better light. Just simple things like giving out food, building things, bringing the kids footballs, etc. One family we constantly met were a family of goat farmers. Over the weeks we got pretty friendly and would share stories through our translator. One day I was talking to him about his goats and how hard life is out here. He said it was fine, but the only thing that bothered him was Bamut. I thought initially it was the local Taliban strongman or something, but he said no, it was an animal. Now, this next bit is said through a translator, so bear that in mind. He said, it's the running wolf. Myself and the translator didn't really know what he meant, but he just said again, a wolf that runs like a man. He then asked us to follow him. Initially I refused, but eventually relented, as I felt he would not lead us to danger, and it may offend him more not to. He led us to a cave about 30 minutes away. In this cave we found what looked like crude drawings on the wall. Nothing you could make out well, but definitely something had drawn by scraping rock. But more disturbing was several gouged lines in the rocks, about 1/3 of an inch deep and about 1 foot long. We had a joke about it, but I tried cutting a similar mark into the wall with my knife, but couldn't do it. Bear in mind, I've been powerlifting since 16, so I'm pretty strong, but couldn't come close. The biggest red flag, however, was the remains of what I think was a goat carcass. Now, this cave was about 300 yards up, about a 60% incline. I don't know how a fox, which is the only predator I saw out there, could kill a goat and drag it from the closest farm, 1.5 kilometers away, up that slope into the mountains. It freaked me out, to be honest. For the remaining 3 months of that tour, I heard noises a few times a week, sounding like a woman wailing. Might be something, or might just be a grown man being scared by a shepherd's story. I'm not weighing in on if they are real or not, but I did find this compelling. I know this is not strictly Dogman, so maybe this is the wrong place for it, but maybe someone might find it interesting. This happened a couple of years ago. At the time I was 17, and me and 3 of my friends had been up to a cabin in North Carolina in the mountains. We were celebrating the end of junior year of high school. It was just the 4 of us. First night we got there, we heard some noises from outside the cabin at about 1:30 in the morning. I did not want to look outside to see what it was. My friend did, and said they couldn't see anything, so I looked out, and I couldn't see anything either. Next morning, we went outside and saw some footprints. Footprints like I've never seen before, and I hope to never see again. Fast forward to the night, we decide to go outside and have a campfire. We're 17, 18-year-old kids, joking around, laughing, having fun, enjoying the summer, when we hear a growl from the woods, and the shrubbery and smaller plants around us start moving, like they're in the wind, even though there's no wind. I look behind me and I see 2 amber eyes, staring. I turn to my friend to ask if he's seen it too. He looks at me pale in the face and asks me, what the hell is that thing? I don't know what it is. All I know is it's massive, and I don't want to find out, so we run inside the cabin and tell the other people that were there what we saw. And of course they don't believe us, so they look outside, and it's standing there, about 9.5 feet tall, greyish black fur, very muscular with these massive claws and huge fangs. So they ran inside and shut the door, and we closed the blinds and tried to forget about the thing. Later that night, I went up to bed and looked outside my window, and it was out there, staring directly at me. Needless to say, I didn't get any sleep that night. The next day, we packed up and left, not wanting to spend another night in those woods. This is the first time I've told anybody about this, because I didn't think anybody would believe me. To this day, the image of that creature staring into my eyes from my bedroom window still haunts me. This happened to my friend and his 2 cousins. My friend just decided to share this story with me. I feel it is necessary to tell the story how my friend told it, i.e., from his point of view. Let's jump right in. A few weeks ago, my uncle and my 2 cousins came out to visit my mum and dad for a barbecue. We have one every year on the 1st of May because it happens to be my mum and dad's anniversary. So this is the 1st of May, and my uncle and my 2 cousins get out to my house. We had just moved in back in February, so we were all excited to have our first get-together out there. It was really nice. We were situated on a mountain top with a decently sized yard that was completely surrounded by woods. My dad had plans to clear out a few sections of the woods so that he could put deer feeders out, so he could have the chance of getting some hunting in out there. While he hadn't started preparing to begin cutting trees down, he decided to test the water, as he phrased it, and put about 8 or 9 trail cameras in to see if there were any deer worth hunting this year. I had helped him out in setting up the trail cameras, finding good spots and figuring out what position they should be facing. Then that was the end of that. So while my dad and uncle were hovering over the grill, me and my 2 cousins had decided to relieve our boredom by playing around in the backyard. We had a trampoline set up. The original owners of the house had decided to include their pool in the deal, along with a volleyball court they made on the far side of the pool, bordering the woods. So me and my 2 cousins are enjoying ourselves on the trampoline without a care in the world. After a short while, my dad and uncle came to us and announced that dinner was ready. So we all went inside and grabbed a plate and then back outside to our back deck and sat down and ate. Me and my dad were the first ones to finish eating. My dad looked at me and suggested that we should go out and check on the trail cameras. We had done this many times before, sometimes even checking 3 or 4 times a week, just to see what was out there in the woods. However, this time would be a little different. Me and my dad are going around the property, checking all the trail cameras. We got to the point to where we only hadn't checked one of them, but for some reason, we couldn't manage to find it. After searching around for almost 10 minutes, we eventually found the exact tree it should have been on. I remember placing it on that specific tree, and it was one of those trees that once you saw it again, after the first time, it was damn near impossible not to recognize it. So my dad came up to me and started looking around, questioning that I had put the trail camera on that specific tree. I told him several times that I was 100% positive that this was the tree, that was the tree I placed the trail camera on. So we start circling the tree, looking for any signs of our missing trail camera. While we were shuffling around, trying to find it, I kicked something hard. I tripped over myself and looked down at my feet to see what had tripped me. And there it was. Well, what was left of it. The trail camera. My dad came over to me, and he saw it just as clearly as I did. The trail camera was completely and utterly destroyed. Upon further examination of the trail camera, we learned that the heavy-duty ratchet straps we had used to secure it around this large tree had been torn apart. Literally. It looked as though something had grabbed the trail camera and just ripped it completely off the tree, and then just went to town on destroying it. My dad, thinking that whatever did this must have stepped into the range of which the trail camera would have taken a picture of it. He tried to open the trail camera, but to no success. This trail camera, which was almost damn near indestructible, was damaged so badly to the point to where my dad couldn't even get it open. My dad, not wanting to admit defeat, grabbed his knife and exclaimed that he was getting that damn thing open to at least get the memory card. That was all he seemed to care about at that moment. So after a few minutes of forcing his knife into the trail camera, he finally managed to get it open. It took him a second to fully realize where the spot for the memory chip was supposed to be, in the tangled mess inside of the trail camera. When he finally found the spot for the memory card, he pulled it out, and to his utter disbelief, the card had broken into several different pieces while inside of the trail camera. My dad was beyond pissed at that point, because not only did he lose a $150 trail camera, he also lost his only chance of figuring out what did this. Now, even more pissed than before, he said, "Let's go back to the house." He picked up the trail camera and we both headed back to the house. He told the others what had happened to the trail camera and then showed them. Fast forward to that night. My dad, my uncle, me and my 2 cousins all went out into the woods, just practically clinging to hope that one of the other trail cameras had spotted the thing that destroyed one of our cameras, since me and my dad had checked them. My uncle went with my dad, so me and my 2 cousins were together. So we began checking every single trail camera we had left. So my cousins and I are heading towards the location of our 3rd camera, just to retrieve the memory card, because my dad had told all of us to just grab the memory card and he will search all of them together. We get about 15 yards away from our 3rd camera, and in an instant, a chill ran from the top of my head all the way down to both of my feet. I told my 2 cousins about this and they said, "We know, we feel it too." We all started panning, looking to see if we could see anything at all. Then I picked up on something. In the direction we were heading to get the camera, I saw a figure. Me, thinking it was either my dad or my uncle, called out to it by saying hello. Then it looked right at me and my cousins. I knew immediately that it was neither my dad or my uncle, because it had glowing red eyes. At first glance, I thought maybe it was an animal like a deer, thinking that it was just reflecting the lights of our flashlights back to us. But that theory went straight through the window when we turned our flashlights away from it, and then it stood up. I watched in utter horror and disbelief as it stood up very slowly, from about the level a deer would be, to being about 9 feet off the ground. As me and my cousins were standing there in shock, it let out a deep, guttural growl and started advancing towards us. I was the first to snap out of the sort of trance I was in and grabbed both my cousins to try and get them to move so we could run. One of my cousins managed to get out of the trance as well, and we both tried to get the other out of it. My other cousin finally showed a sign that he was out of the trance, and just before I could utter the words to run as fast as we could, this thing leaped into the air and landed on top of the cousin that took the longest to snap out of it. Myself and my other cousin fell to the ground as the creature landed. Then, it let out a loud growl before getting off my cousin and grabbing him by the throat. It lifted him off the ground and roared directly into his face before looking at my other cousin, the one who was just getting back to his feet. The creature threw the first cousin away from it, and then hit the other cousin across the face, causing him to go right back down to the ground. Then, it looked directly at me. It took one gigantic step forward and lifted me off the ground as well. Then it did the same roar it did to my cousin, only much louder. I yelled for my cousins to run if they could. One cousin was helping his brother get back to his feet after being thrown, and they looked at each other, then to the creature, and decided there was only one thing to do. In desperation, they each picked up a fallen tree branch from the ground and charged at the creature. One of my cousins connected a swing to its head while the other went directly for the arm the creature had me in. The force of the blow to the creature's head caused it to falter, while the multiple hits to its arm caused it to drop me. My cousins tried to get a few more swings in, but the creature managed to right itself and caught both incoming blows, going directly for its head. It grabbed both of my cousins, one in each hand, and threw them away from it, causing my cousins to drop the branches they were using as weapons and fall back to the ground. All three of us got together and tried to run, but the creature swung one of its arms and connected to all three of our chests, causing us to fall down again. The creature reared back its head and let out the most terrifying roar I've ever heard, then started moving towards us. Just then, a gunshot rang out, then another and another. All three shots connected to the creature. I looked up just in time to see the creature fall to the ground, appearing to be lifeless. I looked over my shoulder to see my dad and uncle both standing there, as white as sheets, both holding a gun in their hands. They both hurried over to me and my cousins and told us to run back to the house immediately, fearing the creature may not be dead. Both of my cousins booked it back to the house, whereas I did not. I wanted revenge. I wanted it dead, for good. I jerked the gun out of my uncle's hands and proceeded to empty the rest of the clip into this thing's chest. Once I was sure it was dead, I handed my uncle back the gun, which he immediately loaded another mag into. I walked past my dad and started heading back towards the house with my uncle and dad following behind me. We get to the edge of the woods and start making our way across the small field to get to the house. Then, out of nowhere, we heard several more growls and roars, sounding almost exactly like the creature we had just killed. Hearing this, immediately my dad screamed at us to run, so we did. All three of us started to book it to the house as fast as we could. We hopped the about 4-foot-tall chain-link fence that made up the dimensions of our front yard, and then ran up the stairs up onto the porch. My dad and my uncle both turned and started firing their guns, not at anything, almost like they were trying to scare the creatures off. That was, until one of them showed itself. Then both my uncle and my dad shot at it at the same time. It fell to the ground lifeless, and then everything went silent. No more growls or roars were being heard. Nothing at all. Everything just went completely silent. All three of us made it back inside the house. And then, that entire night, everyone in the house that knew how to operate a gun safely had one, in their hands or on their person. It stayed that way until the next morning. Then the next morning came around. Against everything that was screaming in the back of our minds, me, my cousins, and my uncle and my dad went out back into the woods. We were trying to see if we could find bodies of the two creatures we had killed. To our disappointment, we found nothing, except, of course, the blood of the creature I myself had shot. That was all we found. Just that one pool of blood. Well, that's it. For those who are curious, my friend still lives at that house. Although he is still scared that anything like that could happen again, he has had no experiences even close to that night since. In fact, he hasn't even seen or heard these creatures since that night. Anyways, that's all for this story. Thank you for listening. I live in a small town, right on the edge of a very popular wooded area that attracts a number of paranormal investigators every year. There's been multiple stories of the weird things that go on in those woods. Black-eyed girl, pig man, occult activity, weird cemeteries, alien sightings, etc., etc. Most of the locals have witnessed something weird go on in those woods, which has widely been reported. But I wanted to talk about a few experiences I've had from living in the town first. I'll start with the experiences from my parents' house. So this town is an ex-miners community. Most of the town is now built on top of the old mines, including my parents' house. My parents' house is, in my opinion, 100% haunted. There's certain parts of the house that I won't go into on my own. So let's start from the beginning. We moved into this house back in 1999. Little things would happen, like things would go missing and turn up in weird places, but nothing major. Things started to pick up over time. One night my dad, who used to believe there was no such thing as ghosts, was up late doing paperwork. He heard footsteps on the stairs and thought it was my mum coming down. After they reached the hallway, they stopped. He thought this was a bit odd and was about to get up to see what was going on. That was when his glass of wine slid across the entire dining room table and smashed up against the wall. Another experience my dad had was when he fell asleep on the sofa and said he was thrown across the room and he heard a man's voice tell him to go to bed. Personal experiences that I've had in that house include seeing an apparition of some old-style boots walk behind me in the mirror, footsteps and voices heard in the hallway and dining room at night. The whole family has seen things move across tables and the fireplace. The thing that's creeped me out the most is that we have all seen the face of a man appear on the living room window. The front of my parents' house has a very long driveway, so we know it's not just someone walking past. We've all seen it, including visitors to our house, and everyone has described it in the same way. The one experience that sticks with me the most is the time I was washing the dishes in the kitchen. It was pitch black outside, but all the kitchen lights were on, and you could see into the hallway. I saw the reflection of what I thought was my dad walking past behind me. I even felt someone walk past behind me. He carried on walking into the next room, which is the downstairs toilet. I started talking to him and thought it was a bit rude he didn't answer me. I then walked into the living room to find my dad sitting there. I asked him why he didn't answer me, and his response was he hadn't moved from the living room all night. But I know I saw a man walk past me. The room that creeps everyone out is the dining room. This room is an extension onto the house, and there is an archway connecting to the next room. There is something about this room and that archway that unsettles everyone. This is where a lot of the apparition activity has been spotted, including shadows, footsteps, and just a general unsettling feeling. I've also experienced someone tapping on the window from the outside of the dining room while I was home alone. The outside of the window is the garden, which is only accessible through the back door of the house. There's so many experiences that I want to talk about, which happened in my hometown. I feel like this could be a few parts. I just want to point out I've been on a few local ghost hunts, and I've met a fair few mediums. They've all said that I'm a sensitive, which is apparently someone who isn't psychic but is able to sense and see more than the average person, which honestly would explain a lot because I have witnessed a lot of weird things. I visited my parents' house this evening for dinner, which reminded me of a few more experiences that I've had in the house. So, back when I was 18, I worked nights. I came home at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning with my now fiancé. We used to work together, which is how we met. We were always super quiet in the morning because everyone else was still in bed. We went straight into the kitchen as usual and clicked on the kettle to make a post-work brew before bed. I also forgot to point out in my last post that the very active dining room is the room attached to the kitchen, so you walk through it to enter the kitchen. Myself and my partner were quietly chatting away when we heard footsteps in the hallway, which entered the dining room and abruptly stopped. We both heard as clear as day a woman start laughing. We both whipped our heads around thinking it would be my mum, but obviously there was no one there. Everyone else in the house was still asleep in bed. The following evening when I woke up, I spoke to my mum about what had happened in the kitchen. She told me that she had also been experiencing weird things go on in the house that week. At this point, we were used to the spirit of the man that lived in our house, but this was something else. It felt sinister. The following weeks brought some odd activity in the house. I and the rest of the household on different occasions heard a little girl skipping and laughing in the hallway. Female whispers and crying could also be heard in the night. My mum went to see a friend after this, who was a psychic. She explained to my mum that this little girl had come into contact with her while in the local town. The girl had taken a liking to my mum and decided to follow her home. It wasn't the first time someone had come to see this psychic about this girl. Apparently she had followed a few people home. We decided to get the house cleansed, to send this girl home. However, the male spirit that we have nicknamed John still remains in the house to this day. Although the spirit of the girl has now left the house, there was something very unsettling about it being there. That atmosphere at the time changed in the house, and everyone seemed on edge. Back in the day, I had a friend who lived next door to the local high school. I stopped over one night and refused to step foot in his house again. A bit of backstory. The school was built in the early 1900s. It's got a lot of history to it. I attended this high school growing up, just like nearly everyone in the town did. There were rumors of it being haunted, but most of the time everyone just put it down to it being a stupid story. Under the school was a number of tunnels that were originally built due to the Second World War as safety precautions. The tunnels are still used to this day for storage. The story goes that one of the students was murdered in those tunnels by a group of teenagers. However, I've never been able to find any truth to this story. So back to my friend's house. The layout of his house was very strange as it used to be a pub back in the early 1900s. We were upstairs in his room just talking. It was about 1 a.m. and it was just the two of us in the house. All of a sudden, through his bedroom window was a flash of light. This obviously caught our attention, so we peered out the window. Directly out of his window you could see the assembly hall of the school, which, for some reason, all the lights were turned on. I looked at him, as if to say, what the hell is going on? And he said to me, "Just wait, you'll hear the singing in a minute." Lo and behold, we heard muffled singing coming from the hall. It carried on for about a minute and then abruptly stopped, and all the lights switched back off in the school. I asked him what the hell that was, and he replied, "It happens fairly often, I've gotten used to it." We put a film on to calm my nerves as to what had just happened. Around an hour had passed and we heard footsteps from outside his bedroom door, and it went eerily cold in his room. The pacing outside his door continued for just a minute and then stopped. I was terrified at this point, but he didn't look bothered by it at all. I told him to explain to me what on earth was going on. He said to me, "This house is haunted by 5 ghosts. The old lady who walks back and forth on the driveway, who could be seen through the kitchen window. She wore a scarf around her head and had a hunched back. The lady with no teeth, who would just stare at you, smile and then disappear. and the two children, who could be heard laughing and playing together. He said he was used to seeing them all, and they were harmless. He then paused, took a breath and said, "There is one more we call the tall man. He was the one outside the door. He would only appear when renovations were being made on the house. He didn't like change apparently, and he would make that known. Rooms where renovations were taking place would become freezing cold constantly. It didn't matter how warm the rest of that house was. That particular room would be stone cold. Things in the room would get thrown around at night, and someone could be heard pacing and stomping angrily about. The reason he was called the tall man was because of obvious reasons. My friend said he'd seen him twice and he was nearly 7 foot tall, in period clothing and wearing a top hat. After that night, he did say to me that he was unsure why he had made an appearance that night, as there was no renovation work taking place when I'd stopped there. We both got obsessed with trying to find out the history of that house, but couldn't find anything apart from the fact that it was an old pub. I wouldn't go back to that house after that night, and every time I would walk past the house on my way to school, I would get anxious and refuse to look at it. The town has a number of pubs, 2 of which are from the 1700s and still in use today. These 2 pubs are particularly very haunted, and I'll be writing about those in my next post. As mentioned in my last post, there's a couple of notorious pubs in my town that are known for their paranormal activity. I wanted to talk about a bit of the history, so settle in as this is going to be a long one. So let's get into it. The Cross Keys. The former coaching inn was built way back in 1746 and still stands and functions as a pub today. The infamous local serial killer, William Palmer, who poisoned a number of people, was said to be a regular, and there is a story of him poisoning one of his possible victims in that pub. The pub is known for cold spots, people's drinks moving, voices and footsteps in the cellar, and numerous accounts of shadow people. William Palmer was eventually caught and was hanged for his crimes. It is his spirit that people believe still wanders the pub. The Four Crosses. If you're ever on the hunt for a truly terrifying experience, the Four Crosses is the place to go. Declared as one of the most haunted pubs in Britain, the Four Crosses was built in the 17th century, and again it still is used as a pub today. There's reports of a Roundhead soldier from the Civil War who is spotted in a ladies' toilet, as well as a woman called Emily who constantly cries. One of the locals from the early 2000s is said to have never left the pub after he died. A young man in the garage who committed suicide is also still residing here. The most common ghost is that of a little girl who is seen often in the downstairs bar. People report this as being the black-eyed girl from the local woods, but from my personal experience, it is not her. The Four Crosses hosts ghost tours on a regular basis, one of which I attended a few years back. We got started on our night with the usual tour of the building before splitting off into smaller groups. About 6 of us were sitting in one of the bedrooms, asking the usual,
If there's anyone here, make yourself known.
After a few minutes, the TV came on in the room and lit the room up with static, white noise. This obviously shit us all up. After a few seconds, it switched back off again. Upon investigation, we found that the TV wasn't even plugged in. None of us had a logical explanation as to how this had happened. We moved our investigation to the attic of the building. Just a bit more history for you here. The wood beams in the attic were originally beams taken from a ship so the wood beams are older than the building. This was told to us after a couple of people in my group, myself included, said we felt a bit motion sick. Apparently, it was a regular occurrence in that room. So we got out the Ouija board to see if we could contact anyone. We did. We started talking to the little girl. She was scared and felt alone. She was trying to find her mother. She spelt out her name to us, Emily. We asked if she was buried in a cemetery across the road, and she said yes. A few people went over to the cemetery and actually found the grave of a little girl named Emily. Throughout the night, we conducted a number of investigations where we heard whispers, creaks, and odd noises. As we came to the end of the night, we placed a torch on the table, and we asked Emily to turn it on, to which it lit up extremely bright. This was actually caught on video. Everyone seems to have a story about the Four Crosses, and it is extremely haunted. It was one of the most active ghost hunts I've ever been on. It is close to the local woods, but people are unsure if they are connected. As I edge closer to talking about the infamous woods, I thought I'd talk about one of the oldest locations in the town, which lies just on the edge of the chase, Castle Ring. Castle Ring was originally thought to date back to the Iron Age. Although there is no defined date, the area is believed to be over 2,000 years old. Unfortunately, only the perimeter groundwork is there today. During the 12th or 13th century, a hunting lodge was built, the foundations of which are still visible. Rich in history, this small hill fort has a lot of stories behind it, from UFOs to werewolf sightings to the spirit of a nun, and as always, my own personal experiences of the place. So, let's get into it. Back in 2004, a local was driving past the car park that lies at the bottom of the Castle Ring when he spotted a hair-covered humanoid figure that crossed the road. Shocked by what he was witnessing, he slowed his car down and attempted to take a photo. He was quoted as saying it was about 7 feet tall, with short, shiny dark brown hair, a large head, and had eyes that glowed bright red. The spirit of a nun is also seen near Castle Ring, around where locals would collect water. I was unable to find her backstory. People are unsure if she drowned here, was murdered, or is just somehow connected to the area. The abandoned windmill that lies just up the road from Castle Ring also has a sad backstory. Local folklore suggested that this windmill was built on an old, pagan burial ground, which would suggest why it's so active. 2 children also suffocated in the flour silo, who are still reported to be active in the area to this day. The legend also tells of a tall black shadow-like figure that was spotted as the children suffocated, which is possibly the same shadow humanoid that was seen back in 2004. Earlier this year, while stuck in lockdown, I decided to take the dog for a walk as part of my daily allowed out once a day for exercise. I hadn't been up Castle Ring for years, so I thought it would make a nice change to my usual walk. It was raining, so I knew hardly anyone would be out. I parked up and noticed my car was the only one there. I didn't think much of it, as this year has been a whole load of weird. I started walking around the perimeter on the allocated path. As the path dipped into more of an enclosed wooded area, I started to feel very uneasy. I took off my headphones as something didn't feel right. My eyes started darting left to right as I felt like something was watching me. My dog, who loves everyone and everything, started snarling and barking at something in the woods. At this point, I decided to go straight back to my car. I picked up the pace and walked back on myself, constantly looking around. Out of the corner of my eye, something caught my attention. I snapped my head back around to catch what looked like a black shadow darting behind one of the trees. I ran back to my car and drove as quick as I could away from that area. I now remember why I hadn't been up there in years. The last time I was up there, myself and a couple of friends witnessed strange-looking lights in the sky. The whole area just made me feel uneasy, and even thinking about it gives me chills. I know I'm not the only one to have experienced weird things go on up there, and I certainly won't be the last. I thought it was about time I spoke about the woods. Stretching for 30 miles, Cannock Chase truly is a stunning place to go in the day. If you're stupid enough to wander up there in the night, make sure you don't go alone. However, just because you go in the daytime, don't think the light will protect you. The spirits and demonic entities of the chase are known to make an appearance throughout the day. In the 60s, 2 girls between the ages of 5 and 6 were murdered. Their bodies were found on the part of the chase that is known as Birch's Valley. This bit of history is important, so keep it in mind. So let's get into it. The most famous spirit that haunts the chase is that of the black-eyed girl. She doesn't appear very often, but when she does, it causes a meteor storm. Back in 2014, a local was flying his drone over a dense, wooded area of Birch's Valley. It was there he captured what looks like a girl with black eyes, floating between the trees. Footage is available on YouTube. It had been 30 years since the last sighting of this girl, but no one knows why there was such a long gap in the sightings. When sightings take place, a piercing scream of a girl can be heard. People flock towards the noise, thinking a child is in danger. No older than 10, the girl is known to stand there with her hands covering her eyes. She will then lower her hands and reveal the coal black pits that she has for eyes. And within the blink of an eye, she will disappear back into the woods. Every person that has witnessed her has given the same account. She does the same thing over and over. She will also only appear in the daytime. So the murders that I was on about at the beginning of the post, some people believe that the black-eyed girl is the spirit of one of these little girls. It is said that around the time of the murders, another 7-year-old girl went missing, but her body has never been found. Just a bit more to add to this story that's slightly more close to home. Around 15 years ago, my father-in-law was driving back from work. He drove through the chase, just as many people do every day on their commute. He drove down a long stretch of road through Birch's Valley. He looked in his rearview mirror to see 2 very young girls sitting in the back of his car. He slammed on his brakes and swerved his car. He came to a stop and checked the back seat again. Nothing. The girls had disappeared. He explained to me in much detail what the girls looked like, from the color of their hair down to the clothes they were wearing. He is convinced to this day that the spirit of those little girls who were murdered had made their way into his car. The chase is covered in paranormal activity, from the demonic pigman to the copious amounts of spirits reported to have been seen. I love going up there for the beauty of the area, but it always feels as if I'm being watched. Local folklore talks about a horrendously creepy-looking creature that stalks people of the chase. Ask a local about the pigman. They'll smile and tell you the story, as if it were just a ghost story to tell children. Ask them to go into the depth of Cannock Chase with you, and you'll see the look of horror take over their face. The story goes that a woman who was accused of witchcraft became pregnant. She didn't want to bring shame on her family by having a child out of wedlock, so she went deep into the woods to give birth. When her child was born, it was horrendously disfigured, supposedly due to the corruption of her practicing in witchcraft. She offered her child up to the woodland in hopes that she would be forgiven for the evil she had done. It's said she returned to the village where she soon died from a flu-like illness, taking her secret about her child to the grave with her. A few years later, people started to report a humanoid-like creature that had facial features that resembled a pig. He would watch the children from the village while he stood in the tree line, sulking. After a number of children went missing and livestock had been gruesomely killed and thrown around the farmland, the village soon became abandoned and reclaimed by the woods. Centuries went by when the local scout club was camping over the chase, close to where the abandoned village was. The scout leader recalled the story of the pigman. He told the scouts that if they sing a certain song, Pigman would appear. So they all stood around the campfire and summoned Pigman. He is said to have appeared and murdered all of the group apart from one boy. From that day, the Pigman has been known to roam the woods once again. Now, there's absolutely no proof to back up this story, which is why a lot of people state it as folklore. However, there has been numerous accounts of people seeing a man that stands in the tree line, with unusual facial features. People have gotten close enough to see his demonic mutated face. It's then that he will run back off into the tree line, making a blood-curdling high-pitched noise, described as a pig squeal. Unusual footprints have been found in the area, yet no one can work out what animal it's meant to belong to. There has been a number of people report that in the evening, just as the sun is going down, as the chase is quiet and calm, a distant, high-pitched pig squeal can be heard from deep in the woods. Kynoch actually has a large number of pagans that live in the area. It's something that's always seemed to have been part of this town. However, it's a well-known fact that cults and those who delve into dark witchcraft have practiced it on Kynoch Chase. Could the pigman be a result of witchcraft? Or is this entity something else entirely? This will probably be my last post about Kynoch Chase. I still have more stories about the chase, but those are more UFO related. Tonight I wanted to delve into Gaskin's Wood, part of the chase that lies between Hednesford Hills and Kynoch Chase. This small wooded area has a sorrowful backstory. Back in the First World War, a couple lived so close to the woodlands. The husband went off to fight and the wife was left at home. Months later, the letters stopped coming and the wife believed her husband had died in the war. She moved on and started a relationship with one of her neighbors. She soon fell pregnant. The husband suddenly returned home from war, and upon finding out about his wife being pregnant, he murdered her in a fit of rage. It is said he dragged her body out into the garden and left her rotting there for 2 days while it snowed. He then took her to the woods where he chopped her up into tiny pieces and scattered her body. Eventually, after she was reported missing, he confessed to his crimes. The police were unable to locate her, and the husband agreed to show them where she was. He took them to part of the woods where a water container was, of which he showed the police her head. He had stuffed it between a water container and a pipe. The rest of her body was never found. The woods is named after her murder. Their last name was Gaskin, hence Gaskin's Wood. This part of the woods is a popular area for teenagers to camp, and I spent a number of weekends over there when I was younger. I used to cut through these woods on my way home, and always felt on edge, walking through there. Sometimes I would run through it just to get through the woods quicker. Then, one night, myself and a group of friends camped up there. We were pretty loud that night, and we were all just having a laugh, being usual teenagers. As the night drew on, we all eventually retired back to our tents. Around 4 a.m., we were woken by the noise of a woman wailing and crying around the campsite. A couple of us got out of the tent to see what was going on, but there was nothing. We stood about, reassuring each other that we weren't going mad, and that we all heard it. It was quiet. The air went still. No birds, no rustling of trees from animals, nothing. It was eerie. That's when my friend went pale, his eyes looking straight behind me. He whispered, "What? What is that? What is that?" We turned around to see a woman, battered and bruised, wearing a white nightdress, crying. But the thing that made us all stand there in shock and unable to speak was the fact that we could see right through her. And, just like that, she vanished, right in front of us. It's safe to say we quickly packed up everything and were home by 6 a.m. It's been around 10 years since I've stepped foot in that part of the woods, and you couldn't pay me to spend a night there again. I do not know for sure where they originated. I've been told several things from Western North Carolina locals: escaped mental patients, government experiments gone wrong, people from the Depression era who decided living in the hills would be better than the life they were living, and so on. Who knows? I've never focused too much on their origins because, well, how could it ever be verified? I refuse to be one of those guys who claim to have all the answers. However, one thing for sure I'm certain of is that the United States government is aware of these Appalachian feral men. I have often wondered myself if these feral wild men are not men at all but creatures. These feral men could be so feral that they may have more of a beast-like origin. I just do not know. Things I am certain of is that they do have a great tunnel system within our hills and mountains. They will kidnap people, and they are completely feral. They will kidnap people, but they go for children or the elderly. They will eat people, then toss their bones wherever. They will do the same to animals, especially deer. Their trapdoor systems are profoundly intelligent to where people are literally falling into them while hiking in the woods. I'd like to add that the feral men are only in wooded areas of the hills and mountains. You will not find them in natural rocky areas, so I do not account for all the disappearances in rock climbing areas to be feral wild men. The population of the feral wild men has decreased throughout the years. In the case of Dennis Martin, after locals and forest rangers failed to locate them, the Green Beret came in and took over, telling local authorities to stop their own search. The Green Berets stayed in those woods for 10 days, I believe. It was stated that they took the time and killed all of the feral wild men that they could find in that area, and the boys' remains were indeed found by the military. We know the government has done some work in depleting their population. It's believed they do have their own way of communicating with one another, and have developed packs. They avoid being spotted by mostly staying underground, but they tend to scope out areas by hiding above in the trees. I've said before to look up and not down when in the woods. People never think to look above them. The trees are great hiding places. You will find few people here and there who have spotted a feral wild man. Getting them to talk about it in detail is like pulling teeth. Stories and sightings of the feral wild men are kept tight within families and locals of the Appalachian, just as my grandfather told my father and then passed on to me. But I'm not someone who can keep my mouth shut. I went on a family vacation to the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm not sure the month, but it was in the spring. We had been there a few days, exploring just everywhere. This is something we had done every year, but this year, it turned out to be very different. It was the day before we were to leave and head back home. My dad decided we would take a walk down the trails and streams. We were at Deep Creek Loop Trail. My dad had taken his fishing pole. Dad, Mum, my brother and myself were walking by a stream. My brother and I kind of walked away from the stream, a little ways off trail into the woods. I'm not sure how far we were from our parents. I do know I couldn't see them anymore. I don't remember if my brother or myself saw it first. From a side view, my first thought was an animal because of movement in the trees. So being very quiet, we stepped to the side by a tree to hide and to be able to watch it. What I thought was an animal was indeed not. It heard us and turned towards us. What I saw was horrifying. It was bent over, devouring a dead animal, possibly a deer. It was tearing its guts out and eating it. It had bloody hands, face and chest. I saw enough to know it wasn't an animal, but dear God, it wasn't a man either. It had bloody flesh hanging from its mouth and hands. It had a large forehead that looked like it had knots. It was very hairy, but not as hairy as a bear or a Bigfoot. And between the blood, the skin looked dirty. It was a deformed man. We were so scared my brother took off running first, then I followed. I turned for just a second to see if it was coming after us. As I was turning to run, also it took off running the other way. It didn't stand up totally straight, but I could tell it was male. By what I saw, it was at least 6 feet tall, and may have been taller. Since he didn't stand up straight, it was hard to tell. He was pretty thick, but still very skinny and deformed. What got me was how it looked like a human male and creature mix. I could also smell an odor that was like flesh and garbage. We ran back to my parents and told them. My dad at first thought we might have been trying to pull a prank on him. He played along and walked back to where we had came from. A minute later, he came back and said to us,
"You have to go. Now."
His face was pale, like he lost all his color. We did go to a ranger and told him everything. He said he was going to call another ranger and they would look into it. He thanked us and we drove off. That was our last visit there. I had nightmares for a while, but I never spoke about it to anyone. I still do not know what we saw, but this was a man that was mixed with monster. In May 2019, me and my husband Jay were visiting the North Carolina mountains to celebrate his birthday. We had just planned a drive to go sightseeing for a couple of days, but then decided to take a walk down the Pigeon Creek Trail at Mingo Falls. A friend had told us about the waterfalls. We got there early, around 8:45, and there were no cars or people. We parked and started the walk up the long steps. When we arrived at the waterfall, we immediately saw a monster. It was a wild man, and he was naked and had bushy body hair. His face was deformed and lumpy, skinny but tall, and we could see his chest. His ribs were sticking out. The bottom half of the naked body was more hairy than the top half. The arms looked longer than they should have been. Odd-shaped head. My husband described him as being mangled and deformed. I said, "James, what is that up there?" And as soon as I said that, we both started smelling something awful like garbage and vomit. We stared at him a second, and we saw the man's eyes were white and cloudy, like he had cataracts. He seemed evil and startled that we saw him. He was just standing there. The thing was carrying an old blanket in its hand. and it dragged into the water. Like a little child's blanket, because we saw colours on the blanket, but the blanket was wet and dirty. We watched him a second, and then he crouched down at the top of the waterfall and disappeared into it, as if it dropped down into some bunker. We turned around and went back to our car and continued to look around us. We were scared. We know it was not a Bigfoot, and we know it was a man because we saw the man's uncircumcised penis. The legs were all wet too because all his leg hair was wet. It was about 6.5 feet tall. Hairy, but we could see his skin under the hair. Saw his chest and ribs. It was like a hairy, deformed and mangled man. Cloudy white eyes, big hands. He had full dark facial hair, but looked a little bald on top of its head, with long strands of hair too. We were going to check out the casino in Cherokee, North Carolina later that day, but we decided to go home after that. We believe it was a wild man. I live in West Virginia and have all my life. I don't come from a rich family and am not rich myself. I live in a small, single-wide trailer with my 2-year-old son outside of the town of Gary. My boyfriend is a truck driver and is only home every so often. I'm kinda used to being alone with my son here at night. My closest neighbor is 3 miles and my trailer is back in the woods. This is a mountain town. I grew up hearing scary stories of monsters, but I never saw anything growing up. I never saw anything until now, and I want to tell you about it. So, this all started last summer. I clean houses for a living, and was leaving the last house of the day, and had just picked up my son from the babysitters, and we were headed back home. It was 8 p.m. exactly when we turned in the driveway. My driveway is a very long sand driveway, surrounded by trees and the woods on both sides. I hadn't even got to my house when I saw a man jump from one tree on the right side of the driveway to a tree on the left side of the driveway. I mean, like 30 feet in the air. He just jumped like how a monkey swings from trees. He did this in front of the car as I was still driving slow to get to the trailer. It's bumpy sand on the driveway, so I never go more than 10 miles per hour down it. At that moment, I wasn't sure what I saw, but I did know it was a man. I saw its skin and it had some torn cloth on it too. Arms, legs, all of that a man would have. I did not see its face. I hit my brakes. My son is still in the back seat, almost asleep. I didn't question what I saw or try to make sense of it, because I know it was some creature. Yes, I was scared. My first thought was my son. I only stopped there in my driveway for a second and then went ahead and sped up to go on and get down the driveway so I could get in the house with my son. I'm passing those trees to my left and I'm looking around to see if it's there. I don't see nothing. I just keep going. It's about dark, but I can still see. I see my trailer around the corner up ahead, and I see movement. Okay, so let me add here that it's not uncommon for some deers or other animals to be around the trailer. That's normal. But there was people up ahead, and one of them was in my trash bag. I don't have trash service way out here, so sometimes I will sit a bag of trash on my porch and haul it myself to the dump. So a man was all in my trash. I get closer and these people hear my car, and my headlights are lighting up the front area of my house. I see like 4 of these things run off into the woods. I saw one of them real good. But it was his face that really got me scared. That thing had dirt or mud all over his face, and there was something wrong with his face because it didn't look right to me. His eyes were way up on his forehead, and it had this humpback. It had some dark pants on, but no shirt, and the chest and back had a lot of brown hair. His nipples were huge and dark, and I could see it through the hair. His feet were bare. This was the one digging in my trash bag. He ran off too, but he didn't seem to be in as much of a hurry as the other ones were to get back to the woods. I lost sight of them all, and I waited before I went any further because of my son. I didn't have no gun or anything on me, so I was careful. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, running idle before I drove on up to the house. I grabbed my son and we ran inside, and because of no cell signal down my driveway, I called my uncle once I got inside. My uncle said I was seeing shit, but he came on out there an hour later and looked around. I was so scared while me and my son sat here waiting for my uncle. My uncle got here. He's a big guy and had weapons on him. He investigated. He came back to the front door, white as a ghost. He came in and said he saw the devil in those woods, and that we were getting in his truck with my son and getting the hell out of here. We never called the police or nothing. That was last summer. The winter came and nothing. Then this past March, when my boyfriend was home, we hear scratching at 11 at night on the side of the trailer. A metal sound. He went outside to look, but there wasn't anything there. But he smelled a smell that he described as rotten pig feet. If you eat pig feet, then you know what I mean. We smell bad things a lot, and we see things moving in the trees. But now, my boyfriend will be moving us to another state because of his job, and we only have a few more weeks. But there are some wild clans in West Virginia too, not just in North Carolina and Tennessee. And no, my uncle never talked about it ever, what he's seen. Thank you. Cherokee, North Carolina. My wife and I went to the mountains a few summers ago. We sat our camper up off a public trail, off the Great Smoky Mountain Parkway, 15 minutes outside of Cherokee. It was about 4 a.m. and I had to use the restroom. I won't explain why the commode in our camper wasn't working, that caused me to have to go outside and piss at the campsite public outhouse. I'm in my 60s and I just can't hold my bladder like I used to. I didn't want to go outside, but I did. I remember it being real hot outside and humid. Even at 4 in the morning, it was very sticky outside. It was dark, hot, and all I could hear around me were bugs and frogs. I walked the short distance to the little wood building that held the commode. There was a string you pull up above you to turn on the single light bulb. After I finished, I walked out of the building and looked towards the camper. Sweet God Almighty, there's this thing standing by my camper door. It had long frizzled up hair, and the bones in its shoulders and forehead protruded out like its bones and scalp plate were broken. It looked like a man that had been tossed in a meat grinder. It was naked, and I mean pure naked. It had a penis. And I saw the kneecaps, and they looked all messed up too. Like they had been smashed on and were swollen or something. It had very hairy arms and legs, but that was it, besides the long hair on its head. But there was still even a balding spot right in the center of the head. So it saw me and I saw it, staring right at each other. I swear to God, all those bugs and frogs I heard, gone. No sound. No sound. Quiet as a mouse in those woods. It was so quiet I could hear its breathing. And I don't mean to be sad, but you know when someone is about to pass away and they have this gurgle, fish out of the water breathing? Well, that's how it was breathing. A rasp to it. This thing stood at my camper door, and I was terrified it was about to walk in to my sleeping wife. The camper had 2 solar lights in front that lit up this thing. I watched it turn, and I watched him slowly walk into the woodline until he disappeared from my sight. But in his hand was a dead rabbit. I think it was a rabbit. He was just holding on to it. Well, I mentioned my bladder because I won't even lie. I pissed on myself. Standing right there. I don't know where it came from because I just got done in the bathroom. But I did. I pissed on myself in terror. I ran to the camper, and when I got to the front door, I smelt a very bad smell. I opened the door and locked it. I stayed awake until daybreak, looking at the side window towards that tree line. I told my wife 3 months later. She was the one who... Oops. Can you explain what I saw? It was a man. I didn't mention. That smell still lingers at my camper door. Even now, I can smell it. I've bleached it and everything. Rotting flesh, if you ask me. I'm in West North Carolina, right outside the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm not sure if I've had any encounters with the wild men. I did hear something scream once, close by in the woods, sometime after midnight, but assumed it was a bobcat. But I've heard rumors and old wives' tales my whole life about them, and I can confirm there was at least one out there. My wife is from a very rural part of the county, right on the Tennessee state line. As we say around here, they're so far out they have to pipe in sunshine. Over an hour to get to town, and that's using the interstate for most of the way. Go the long way and it's more like an hour and 45 minutes. Her family is one of the original families that settled there in the 1830s or shortly after. In that area, everybody's related to everybody else in some way or another. And the only way I can describe the folks there is that they are clannish. Maybe an outdated word, but it's the most apt description I can give. They don't trust outsiders easily. They don't talk much to anyone who wasn't born there or lived there at least 10 years. Like I said, I've heard stories my whole life about the wild man, but one in particular was always distinguished from the others because he had a nickname. The wild man of a certain valley. Everybody knew at least one person who had seen him while out hiking, fishing or camping. And they all said the same thing. He had a long grey beard, nearly to his waist. Long grey hair, was dressed in ragged overalls with no shirt, and went barefoot. As soon as he realized you had seen him, he turned and ran, seeming to disappear in just a few yards. So far, the description matches the feral wild men that we discuss here, right? My wife and I had been together probably a year or so when I randomly thought of the stories of that wild man. Since she was born and raised there, and her families go back to the settling of the area, I asked her if she had ever seen him, or knew anything about him. She laughed and said, "Of course I've seen him. He's my uncle." Actually, he was her great-uncle, in his 70s at the time. He was always a quiet and private person, and in his early 20s he packed a few things, walked out into the wilds and built a little one-room cabin, built in true pioneer style by hand with only hand tools. He was far from any other people, a couple of hours hike from her house. Seldomly he would come and visit her dad, to trade for a few staple foods and get news of the family. Maybe an hour later, he'd be gone again. Her dad was the only person he would visit. My wife said he didn't like or trust anybody else as much as her dad. He died maybe 5 or 6 years ago. There was a big winter storm headed our way. My wife's dad hiked out to see if her uncle wanted to come stay at his house until it was over. Her uncle refused. He said he had everything he needed and he would be just fine. The storm was pretty bad, especially in that area because there's a large lake and they get more snow because of the moisture from it. It took about a week before it melted enough for her dad to check on her uncle. When her dad got there, sadly, the wild man had frozen to death. They buried him right by his house, knowing he would want to be by himself in death as he was in life. He was over 80 when he died. So there's proof for you that wild men can and do exist. Why couldn't the feral wild men we talk about here have started in a similar way? This happened to me about 15-16 years ago, when I was displaced in Las Vegas after Hurricane Katrina occurred. I was 9 years old at the time, and I lived in this cul-de-sac of townhomes. Without sharing all the details, this was the first time I ever had a friend who lived in my neighborhood, so he and I would hang out from the early mornings to about 11 p.m. or so. One night, I can't remember how late, but it was pretty dark outside. While we were hanging out, there was this ice cream truck that was passing around. It hadn't turned on the typical music you hear when a truck's approaching, but when I got near, it began to light up and play the music. My friend and I, who was the same age as myself, approached the truck to see what it had to offer. I decided I didn't want any ice cream, likely because I didn't have any money to buy any, but my friend wanted some. He explained what he wanted to the guy. Then the guy suggested he get in the truck and pick out which flavor, and he would give him the ice cream for free. For some strange reason, my friend was actually going to get in the truck when I yanked his arm and screamed something. Immediately after, we ran to our parents and explained to them what happened. After this, we'd have to be inside by the time the sun set. I can't say for sure what would have occurred, but I'm thankful neither of us got into that truck. My friend and I, age 11 to 12, summer, housing development in Illinois. My first summer in my new home out of the sort of sticks. My friend from school and I loved to run around the neighborhood and into the forest behind the homes. While we were out, we noticed an ice cream truck kinda tracking us. It had its music running, so we sort of rode it off and continued our adventure. Every time we'd pop out of the woods again, the ice cream truck would never be too far behind. Same driver, same plate. We laughed and joked about it being some weird new business tactic to get kids to buy. However, we were broke, so we just kept playing. The stalking was incessant after a while. Every turn we'd make, no matter where we'd pop up in the housing development, it was always near. The driver always pretending he didn't see us, but keeping pace as we walked. Eventually, it was time to go home, and so we did. When I returned home, I told my mum about the experience, and she called the police. After a bit of questioning, they decided I was just letting my imagination run wild, but they'd check it out anyways. The initial search of the neighborhood turned up nothing but a single ice cream truck, driven by a woman, ran by a reputable company. About a week later, they got a similar report by some other younger girl in the neighborhood. They found the truck with the exact guy, completely unlicensed, with a little boy, unconscious, and tied up in the back. Back in my high school years, I'd often meet with a few friends at a local Dunkin' Donuts, which was conveniently near a railway we'd all take to our weed guy's house. My closest friend at the time, Katie, and I usually met up earlier than everyone else just to hang out, order our extra large drinks and hash browns, and attempt at some "hey mister" shenanigans to score some tall boys from anyone willing to buy us beer. I'd consider us to be pretty naive and overly nice girls, which never proved to be an issue to either of us, until we were nice to the wrong person. Now for a little background of my hometown. I grew up in the forgotten borough of New York City, Staten Island. For those who are unaware, there was, and kind of still is, a pretty horrendous opioid epidemic. So seeing zombie-like civilians strolling the streets is fairly common. Because of this, I became pretty good at spotting out someone struggling with heroin and things of the sort. Anyways, on this one day, Katie and I met up at Dunkin' and sat at our usual booth. We were in the midst of messing around with our phones and being our overly giggly selves, when I noticed out of the corner of my eye, someone suddenly stop outside of the glass door. Still smiling, I glanced over to see if it was maybe one of our friends, and ended up making direct eye contact with a basic Staten Island looking dude. I looked away, unbothered, and carried on. Just another customer anyways. After the guy got his coffee, he sat directly at the table across from our booth. I chose to ignore the fact he sat weirdly close and resisted eye contact, since that already awkwardly happened. But I guess the motion caught Katie's attention as she looked over her shoulder at the man settling in. She looked back at me, made a face that said, okay, and we just giggled and tried to move on. Every now and then, I glanced in his direction, mainly just because I like to be observant of my surroundings, but also because I kept seeing him scratch at his nose, neck and face in my peripheral vision, and noticed he was bleeding from various little cuts on his body. This was a dead giveaway he was doing some form of opiate, as they tend to get very itchy and scratch until they break skin. A few minutes later, the man asked if one of us had a charger he could borrow. I kindly denied, and Katie only had an iPhone charger while the man clearly had an Android phone. This slight exchange was enough for the man to feel invited, and he'd continue to make comments for quite some time. Being that this was about 4 years ago, I don't remember the entire conversation, but I do remember him often asking general questions like if we live around here, what we do in our free time, and creepy things of the sort. I was pretty vague yet polite in my responses, but Katie was always a bit more enthusiastic in her words, making it pretty easy for this guy to reciprocate and basically join our conversation altogether. In Katie's innocent stupidity, the guy basically found out some of the main train stops we'd get off at to hang in those areas. He also found out if we indulge in the devil's lettuce, which only made this guy feel even more inclined. At some point, he mentioned how his ex-girlfriend got him into some trouble, got him into heroin, which he used to sell, served jail time for, and pretty recently got out. He also mentioned how he's been an Icecream truck driver ever since his release. He told us that he's always driving around the train stops Katie mentioned earlier. He also, repeatedly, offered to give us rides around in his truck someday, with free ice cream as the bribe. Again, we were pretty naive and overly nice girls, Katie more so than I. So one thing led to another, and eventually this guy was asking for Katie's social media, which she happily obliged to. She's always been really dedicated to expanding her follower count. Throughout this entire exchange, I was mostly just nodding, smiling, laughing here and there, so my remaining silent during the social media exchange went unnoticed. However, once the guy started following Katie on Instagram, he quickly found mine, through a tagged picture on her page. I wasn't private at the time, so he immediately started liking and commenting on nearly every one of my pictures. The comments were extremely cringy, consisting of heart eye and water squirt emojis, and things like, "Damn, ma." Finally, after the longest half hour ever, I urged we should really be catching our train. Fortunately, the man wasn't persistent after that, and we were on our way with no problem. After some verbal recap of what just happened, I convinced Katie to block him, and I did the same. We brushed it off with that. I honestly forgot about this strange interaction until about a week later. I was hanging out with some friends at a park near my high school when Munchies made me crave Ralph's Ices, which was just up the block. I ventured off with one other friend and almost made it to the store before the sound of an ice cream truck approached from behind us. Completely lost in conversation, my attention was only caught by the high-pitched screeching of the truck's brakes and a somewhat familiar voice. Of course it was him. He shouted out to me, but with Ralph's only a couple of feet in front of us, I ignored him and rushed in with my friend. The guy didn't stick around, being that he was blocking the whole lane on a narrow two-way road, but we still called our friend at the park to pick us up in his car. For the next 2 weeks, there were about 4 times this man tried to pick me up in his truck. At this point, making me pretty paranoid I was potentially being stalked. The last time it happened, he was parked directly outside one of the train stops, almost as if he was waiting for me. He again called out to me, asking why I blocked him, and saying he just wants to be friends. At this point, I had enough, and told him to leave me alone. My dad's a lieutenant, which was a lie but slipped out in my defense. I walked away before he could respond, and into the diner I was meeting my friends at that night. I saw his truck drive away in the window, and never had an interaction with the ice cream man again. The sound of an ice cream truck has haunted me ever since. I brought this up to my cousin the other day. 15 years later, we can still recall everything about that morning. 15 years later, we still hear her screaming. My older cousin and I grew up together. My father only has one sibling, and we all lived at the end of the same road, and so my cousin and I naturally spent a lot of time together. He's a big guy, 6'5", 350 pound, built like a linebacker. We lived in the middle of nowhere, in a small town in the southern US, outskirts of the outskirts, where bumfuck Egypt comes to get away from it all. My backyard opened up into a state forest, hundreds of miles of trees and briar bushes, and the occasional escaped convict. And poisonous snakes, lots of those. It's just like every other morning, as my cousin and I groggily make our way to the bus stop. Our bus driver liked to come at random times, so we often had to wait around for a while and debate on whether or not it's actually important that we finish school. It's 6:20 in the morning. The sun isn't quite up yet. Birds are starting to chirp. My cousin is in high school. I'm roughly in the 4th grade. Naturally, we don't talk much in our post-sleep stupor. And then we hear it. All around the mulberry bush the monkey chased the weasel. I look at my cousin. My cousin looks at me. Every child knows that jingle. The ice cream truck. The ice cream truck. Yay, the ice cream truck. Except it's 6:30 in the morning, and we don't live anywhere near town. The monkey thought it all for fun. Pop goes a weasel. My cousin tugs on my shirt, pulling me closer to him. His hand is bigger than my shoulder, and he does not let me move from his side. We're looking around, eyeing the trees, wondering how the hell an ice cream truck got all the way out here. Our town didn't even have an ice cream truck back then. There were less than 4,000 people in the town, if that, and there was not an ice cream truck. And then the woman yelled, screamed, a full-throated scream that echoed all over the holler.
Help! They're killing me! Help!
What? I'm scared, absolutely terrified and shaking. My cousin shushes me and boosts me up on his hip. The jingle continues, and damn if it isn't suddenly the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. Something heard in every children's movie, played out of every goddamn ice cream in the US.
All around the mulberry bush the monkey chased the weasel. Help!
The bus turns the corner, coming to a stop beside us with a weary hiss. We're frozen, staring at the woods behind us, where we're sure the noise was coming from. But how could it? There's nothing out there but miles and miles of nothing. No houses, no people, not even a road or a path. My cousin hurls me onto the bus and shoves me into a seat, eyes trained on the trees behind us. The bus door slides closed, and we hear it one more time.
The monkey thought it all for fun. Pop goes the weasel.
This all happened within the last 2 to 3 hours. My mum and I have been trying to catch the ice cream truck all summer, as they have some certain ice cream bars that you can't really get anywhere else around here. We were in the middle of watching a show when we suddenly heard the ice cream truck outside. It was loud, signifying that it was close. I got up and went to the door. I saw that it was in front of our house. I began to say it was too late, but I then realized it was slowing down, not driving away. Now this wasn't an, oh, there is someone coming, I should stop, slow down. It was an, I've been slowing down to a stop since before you opened the door, slow down. My mum told me to go out and make sure he didn't drive away. It was odd, as it was about 9 p.m, but we wanted our ice cream. My mum came outside and we ordered. The guy was quiet, but said that he stopped because he heard voices. No one was outside, and we were inside when we were talking. There was an open garage door a few houses down, but no one was there. He was able to find the flavor I asked for, but had some trouble finding the one my mum asked for.
I just saw it. I just ate one.
I figured that he was new to the job and just nervous, so I thought nothing of it. We paid and went back inside. Once we got inside, however, I noticed mine was open. I asked my mum if she had opened it, as she is the one who had both of the treats. She said no. She offered me hers, as we both knew neither of us wanted to eat an opened ice cream bar. When she noticed that hers was really puffed up, as if it had been blown up with air. We threw both of them away. After thinking about it for a few minutes, it all seemed so weird. 9 p.m. The music suddenly turned on when we both heard it. It didn't slowly fade in as if it had been on the whole time. It slowed to a stop in front of our house before I even opened the door. He was quiet and gave us 2 suspicious ice cream bars. He sped away after that, not stopping for anyone else. Just 15-ish minutes ago, I called my mum in from the garage to tell her that the cats were trying to catch this bug that looked like a wasp or something. As she came in, she saw something through the kitchen window. She rushed me to the front door in the next room, and when she opened it, a different car drove away. I didn't see the full thing, but she says it was pulled over with the lights on and quickly peeled out of there when we opened the door. My dad just came home, and we told him about everything. He thinks it's odd, but that's about it. Sure, the 2 incidents could be 2 totally innocent, coincidental occurrences, but it's too weird. My mum wants me to sleep in the living room on the other couch tonight, just in case something happens, and I have no objections because I'm nervous as hell. Creepy people that we saw tonight, let's not meet again. My grandpa, Norm, died when I was 4. I was so young, I only vaguely remember him. But he's obviously still my grandpa, and I still love him. Growing up, I always saw ghosts, and the majority of the time, shadow people. I grew pretty used to it, but sometimes it would still freak me out. Well, one day, when I was probably 9 or 10, I was staying at my grandma's for the weekend. I did this frequently. My grandma borderline raised me. I didn't have a bedtime on weekends, especially there. And my grandma had internet and a computer that I didn't have at home. So I would usually be up till 2 or 3 a.m. on YouTube and whatever 9-year-old me felt like doing. As I've always had insomnia and sleeping issues, and wanted to make the most out of having the internet. So it was probably around 2ish in the morning. I was seeing shadow people that night out of the corner of my eye, messing with me, and it happened to be one of those nights where it freaked me out. And I was very anxious and paranoid. I suddenly had the urge that I needed to look to my left, so I did. In the doorway of my grandma's bedroom, I saw my grandpa, Norm. I may have been young when he died, but I do have memories with him, and remembered what he looked like, so I knew who he was right away. He just smiled at me, and then disappeared. The second I looked over and saw him though, all of my fear vanished, and I was instantly calm. The entire energy of the room shifted, and I was fine the rest of the night. Naturally, I told my grandma what happened the next morning, and she nearly cried, and still talks about it to this day. I'm going on 20 now. Unrelated to that story, but I think it's worth mentioning. I was talking to my grandma recently, and she told me that one night, somewhere within the span of the past month, she was crying because she missed him, and has been dreaming and thinking of him a lot lately. During this, she said to the empty room, "Norm, if you're up there and watching over me, send me some sort of sign. Rain dimes down so I know." Since that night, she's been finding dimes everywhere she goes. Way more than what would be considered usual. I am in no way religious, but I would say I'm pretty spiritual, and I don't believe in coincidences personally. And that story has stuck with me since she told me. Sorry this ended up much longer than expected. I just thought I'd share one of my nice ghost stories. I had 2 dogs, one being a 100-pound Chow Chow retriever mix. He didn't like to jump. He had a spot on the couch he could crawl up on, but when it came to beds and cars, he always needed a lift up. At night, he would wander around, and when he was finally ready for bed, he would finally walk into my bedroom and plop down on the side with a thump that would shake the bed. In 2012, he developed inoperable cancer, and from then on, he went pretty fast. The day came where it was time to say goodbye. I took him to the vet and put him down and drove home without him. I was very distraught, losing my happy boy. Now, my bedroom door creaks pretty loudly when it opens. I sleep with my door open a crack so my other dog and my cats can come and go through the night. Maybe a week of mourning passes, and I'm up one night. I'm just laying there with my eyes closed, trying to fall asleep, when I hear my door creak slightly. I thought it could have been my other dog and didn't think much of it. I open my eyes and look for her, and find she's not there. Then, the door creaks again. I sit up and watch it, The door opens a little at a time, maybe a couple of inches over a couple of minutes, until it is wide open. I just sit there and stare at it, unable to move, because I couldn't explain what was happening. After it had been open for about 30 seconds, I feel a large thump by the side of my bed that shakes it. The first night I was terrified. I couldn't fall back asleep. The next night it happened again. As soon as it was light out, I got out of bed and began trying to manipulate the door that opened on its own. My window was closed at night, but I opened it. I tried pointing fans at the door. I pushed the door open myself. I opened other windows when it was windy to create a cross draft. I turned all the air in the house on. Nothing I could do could cause my door to move at all. After about a week of this, I'm not scared anymore. I can't explain it, but it even started to be a little comforting. Feeling the thump of my beloved dog laying down next to me, I'll take it. After that week, it just stopped. I laid up at night and waited for it, but it never happened again. 8 years have passed, and my door has never, not once, opened on its own again. When my other dog passed, I waited for it to happen, but it never did. I was, however, up at night again, and I heard her growl like she did when she needed to be let out. Only the once, and then nothing paranormal ever happened again.
The doorbell rang after 1:30 a.m. The movie The Vikings, with Tony Curtis and Kirk Douglas, was on downstairs, music blaring while my mum was busying herself around. She was a night owl, but this night she was up until my dad got home. They had fought earlier, and he went out for the night with business associates. She was supposed to accompany them, but refused, so he went alone. I had just returned from looking for him. He had called just before 1 a.m. He thought I was my mum. He asked me to pick him up. I could tell he had been drinking. "Stay where you are, Dad. I'm on my way." At 1:06 a.m., just as I'm walking out the door, he calls again.
"I'll be walking and waving my arms,"
he slurred on repeat. "No, Dad. Stay where you are. I'm leaving now." When I got there, I could not find him. Every time I tried, I was pushed back by the blast of late December air. But there was a car, turned the wrong way on the dark, rural, 2-lane road, with a rumpled up hood, and a windshield busted out. Wow, I thought. They must have hit a deer. No cops yet. No ambulance. I got there before they did. I opened our front door shortly after I got home to a police officer and a minister. I'll never forget, till the day I die, the minister. His dark skin, set off by his large, compassionate dark eyes that stared right into me. Afraid for me, reaching out to me, knowing he was about to change my life. The officer asked me if my mum was home. "Yes," I answered. "If this is about my dad, I was just looking for him," I said with a casual, almost friendly tone to hide my apprehension.
"We need to speak to your mother,"
was the officer's curt response. His "just the facts, ma'am" demeanor was more than matched by the compassion the minister gave me by his full-on profound stare. While I was hanging up my coat, I heard the minister tell my mum,
"There's been an accident, and your husband was killed."
He died at 1:11 a.m. Dad and Mum were 40. I was 19. Home from school. It was just after Christmas. My siblings were younger, and all still in school. The rest of the night was a whir of hospital, identify the body visits, the priest, phone calls, drives to the place he died and back.
and back again, and sitting around in disbelief. What do we do now? He was the most powerful man in the world. He was gone. We were adrift. It was a long time before I could sleep again. I think it was not until later that next night. People were calling. Small town, so it was the headline on the front page that morning. Pedestrian killed on X road. I know because my boyfriend at the time and I ran out and bought the paper at dawn. Papers. I still have mine. People kept coming over bringing food, crying, needing comfort. The janitor from my former high school was the first person to call with condolences. Dad was very loved. We were numb. Mum was melting. I had to step up. I finally had enough and went to bed. Everyone else remained talking downstairs. Mum was still up. So were siblings, 2 to 4. I decided to go lie down in Mum and Dad's bed, on his side of the bed, and buried my face in his pillow. It smelled like him. Lying flat on my stomach, I silently cried myself to sleep in the darkness. He'd been dead now about 24 hours. How was that possible? At some point, I was awakened by someone sitting on the bed, stroking my hair. It was a real, genuine, sensory touch. Comforting, loving. I felt it from a dead, exhausted sleep state. No mistaking it. So real that when it woke me up, I reached up expecting to touch my mum's hand. Empty space. "Mum?" I said as I rolled over. Silence. "Mum? Is that you?" Electric stillness. I reached out from the bed and waved my arm back and forth in the darkness. Nothing. No one. I sat up. "Mum!" Dead silence. Dead darkness. I got up, ran out of the room and sprang to the top of the stairs. "Mum!" "Yes?" she replied. "Were you just up here in your room, trying to wake me up?" Pin drop. "No, honey," she said softly. "I just felt you rubbing my hair," I implored, almost begging. Pause. "It wasn't me, sweetheart," she said flatly. But it had been so real. It woke me up. I ran all the way down the stairs and just looked at her. We just stared. Tears started to well up in her eyes, then in mine too. We didn't say another word. We didn't have to. I turned away, staring at the floor, and just whispered to myself, "I love you too, Dad." This story happened a long, long time ago. When I was 4 years old and my little brother was 2. It was around this time of year, Thanksgiving to be precise. My mother was calling my younger brother to eat from the living room, but he didn't come right away. When he came in, my grandma jokingly asked what took him so long. What he said caused the people at the table to go quiet. "Joe gives kisses." Some info. My great-grandfather was named Joseph, and he went by Joe. He had been dead for 5 years. For ages, people had always chalked it up to being me, as my name was Joseph as well. But my brother always called me by my full name. My brother has mental issues, and that's why nobody batted an eye when he would look up at the living room mantel and laugh. I think it was Grandpa Joe he was talking to. My mum's house is huge, relatively secluded, and century-old farmhouse in Wisconsin. To add to the already spooky vibes, The former residents are buried down the road from the house in a tiny graveyard. I've had more than a few experiences on the property, and my mum has too. This is one of the more wholesome ones though. Specifically, in the kitchen dining room of my mum's house, we'd occasionally spot a black shape moving in the corner of our eye. That would be gone when we looked at it. I don't know how else to describe it, except that even though I've never seen it head on, it has always just suggested the thought of cat to me when I saw it. It was a very neutral but skittish presence. It would also seem to appear mostly as we were mid-conversation or mid-meal. Maybe it wanted a treat or something. As a cat person, I've always felt fond of it. We had both a cat and a dog, but based on size and colour, it couldn't have been either of them. No pest problems at that time either. I've seen it, my mum's seen it, and I think another family member or two has seen it too. The reason I don't remember is because, like most of the other paranormal activity in the house, it stopped happening within 6 months of us moving in. I hope at this point, the ghost cat is somewhere with its former owners, finally getting the snacks and cuddles it deserves. This experience happened in May of 1979 when I was 15 years old. My maternal grandmother had passed, maybe a week or two before this event. I always loved going to her house as a child and spending the night. She was a wonderful grandma. She had moved to California after her last husband died in 1976, so I didn't get to see her for the last 3 years of her life. I was a freshman in high school, and in English class we were reading Romeo and Juliet. I had stayed up late that night while my parents slept to watch Romeo and Juliet on our local PBS station. All 3 of my older brothers had already moved out of the house, so I was the only one awake at that time. I was laying on the floor of the living room with my pillow and blanket, with only the television on. All the lights in the house were off. I'd never really had any odd things happen to me in our home, and was quite comfortable being up alone with no lights. A little explanation on how our house was laid out. The living room was in the front of the house, with the dining room and kitchen directly behind the living room. The area between the living room and the dining room is completely open, while the kitchen area is blocked from the living room by the wall for the stairs going to the basement. You could walk from the living room to the dining room, to the kitchen, to the front hallway, which brings you back to the living room. Between the kitchen and the front hallway is the basement stairs, and if you go the other direction, it's a hallway to the 3 bedrooms and bathroom. On with the story. I was on the floor with pillow and blanket watching the TV when I heard the sound of flip-flop shoes come from the kitchen into the dining room and right up behind my dad's reclining chair. That was maybe 3 feet behind me. Now, my grandma always wore flip-flops in the summer. It was a sound I associated with her. I've always loved the paranormal and accepted it as part of life. My mum had told me things that happened to her as a child and adult since I was little. But when I heard the flip-flops, I was basically frozen in fear. I called out in a small voice, "Mom?" Even though I knew it was not her. No answer. I knew she was sleeping and never wore those type of shoes, or even owned a pair of them. I can't even remember if I was brave enough to look behind the chair. I grabbed up my pillow and blanket, turned off the TV, and ran like a frightened rabbit. I'm not sure how I navigated the first corner. It was completely dark in the house, but when I made the second turn to go into the hallway, to the safety of my room, I miscalculated the turn and ran directly into the wall. Luckily I had my blanket draped over my arm, otherwise I might have broken it. When I hit the wall, all my mind could think was that I ran into a person, most likely the ghost of my grandma. I was struck with crazy terror before I figured out it was just the wall. and that I had made the turn too soon. In the safety of my room, lights on, door locked, and under my blanket, I slowly calmed myself down. I don't remember for sure, but I think I slept with the lights on that night. I told my mum the next morning. She asked me why I was so scared, and made me realize that my grandma would never hurt me, and that maybe she just wanted to see me one last time and or say goodbye. That was so true. She wouldn't hurt me, and as I've thought about it over the years, it's really very sweet that she came to me that night. There's no way that anyone will ever convince me that this didn't happen. I was 100% awake at the time, and it was most certainly my grandma. Years later, when my first child, my daughter, was 2, she came to me again, and that time I really believe she saved my life. I'll save that story for another time. I have been dating my boyfriend for 3 years. In September of 2020, his stepfather passed away unexpectedly due to a stroke. I was really close with him. We got on really well, and honestly, of course the death wasn't as hard for me compared to my boyfriend and his family, but it really hurt. His stepfather accepted and liked me immediately upon meeting me. We got along so well. He loves to cook, and so did I. So one day I made him and the family steak for dinner. He was super famous for his steaks. And while I was cooking, he started crying because he was so happy and proud of me. It was really hard because I always saw him as a dad too, and I was excited for him to be a part of our wedding and see our children, etc., etc. Well, when he died, my boyfriend kept saying that he would visit him in his dreams. I was happy for him, but a little sad because he hadn't come to visit me, and I began to wonder if I was even worthy of being visited. I will say I believe I have some sort of abilities, because in my boyfriend's mum's house, I often sense or feel his stepfather, especially when everyone talks about him. I've always been able to see and feel things whenever I was a kid, and so it was no surprise to me. Sometimes whenever we talk about him, he will show up and smile happily or pat someone on the shoulder, and I always relay the message to my boyfriend and he finds it comforting. Well, today is my birthday, and I had a dream that my boyfriend's family threw me a birthday dinner and his stepfather was there. He was a lot skinnier and looked polished. In the dream, I said to him, "Hey, did they bring you back?" He just smiled and shrugged and mumbled something. I then said, "They made you look really good," and he laughed. I gave him a hug and started crying, and he just rubbed my back, and he said something comforting. I said something about how I missed him. I then asked, "Are you in the house a lot? You know, when I see you and stuff." Because sometimes I don't believe I actually have abilities and think it's all in my head. But he smiled at me and said, "Yes, thank you." I woke up immediately after that because my mum came in to tell me happy birthday. Just on Saturday, my boyfriend had thrown me a surprise birthday party with my family, and I cried later that night because his stepfather wasn't there, and his mum didn't come either. Last night, I literally had a dream with him, and everyone else too. I'm a little sad, but so happy he visited me. So this happened to me back in 2017, when I was just about to turn 18. For a bit of context that will be important, I seem to have the same problem that a lot of men have, where I can't find something sometimes, even when it is right in front of my face. This deeply annoyed my mum, and any time that I would ask her to help me find something, and it would be in plain sight, she would pick it up and throw it at me. Not hard, just playfully, and roll her eyes really hard. Back to the day in question. My mum had just been pulled off life support after being pronounced legally brain dead. The choice was up to me, and I knew she wouldn't want a life like that. So on the evening of the day, I had told the doctors to pull the plug. My uncle, who had come from another state to help me get affairs in order, had made scalloped potatoes for dinner. After we'd finished eating, I went to the kitchen to put away the leftovers. I put the casserole dish they were made in on the stove and walked to the pantry to grab the cling wrap. I looked for a minute or two and could not find it. In my emotionally raw state, I began to lose my temper and loudly exclaimed, "Where the fuck is it?" After a moment or two, I saw a swift blur of movement above my head as the cling wrap flew off the second to top shelf and hit me right in the face, but not very hard. It took me a moment to process what had happened. I stood there in complete shock, and then I kinda broke down in the middle of the kitchen. I tried to think of anything it could have been, trying to convince myself it couldn't have been her. But I have come up empty. I have had many experiences with spirits. This is one of them. This happened a long time ago when I was still in school. One day while I was in class, I had to go to the bathroom. When I walked into the bathroom, I could tell no one was in there because all the stall doors were opened. I went into the stall at the very end. While I was doing my business, I heard crying. I was super confused at first because I thought no one was in there. I looked under the stalls, which I know is kind of creepy. When I looked, I saw someone's feet a few stalls down from mine. They weren't wearing shoes, and their skin was more of like a blue color. Then I saw them walking out of the stall, continuing to cry. Even though I wasn't finished what I was doing, I quickly pulled up my pants and walked out of the stall. Mostly because I was scared, but I also wanted to make sure that person was okay. When I got out of the stall, no one was there. I know no one left or came in because the door to the bathroom is very squeaky and loud. I was so scared that I couldn't even go back into the stall to finish. I quickly washed my hands and left. In my school, there's a locker that has a memorial on it of someone who died. To this day, I still wonder if that was the same person I saw in the bathroom or someone else. I still wonder what that spirit was crying about, and genuinely hope they are okay and have moved on. When I was 17, I started out into the world on my first big adventure. I'm a Christian and decided I wanted to expand my knowledge of the Bible and ministry, so I attended a 10-month ministry school program. I didn't want to be a theologian or anything, so one school year was perfect as opposed to a 4-year theological college. It's been 13 years, but I remember everything as if I'd gone through it this year. I was so excited. I was going to be living in a dorm, 4 hours from my home, so it was sort of like moving out on my own, without having to actually be alone. I settled in quickly, met my roommate, and started preparing for a year of fun, growth, and overall self-advancement. At least, I thought that was how the year was going to go. I've always been sensitive to the other side. I've had a connection to the afterlife and spiritual and paranormal beings for as long as I can remember. It isn't out of the ordinary for me to see shadow figures, feel the presence of those departed, and, on a few instances, I've spoken with the dead and not even realized it. Once when I was a child, I remember talking to a man on a bench. My mum asked me who I was talking to, and I told her, a nice man. It wasn't until years later when I mentioned the memory, she told me that no one was on that bench with me. Anyway, enough sidetracking. The school year started normal. but certain areas of the building always gave me an unsettling feeling. There was a closet space in our floor's hall that was always unnaturally dark, even when the hall lights were on. I never actually saw anything there, but I felt eyes following me when I passed. It got to where I'd run past it to get to my room and slam the door as quickly as possible. There are 3 events I remember that happened directly to me. After those, I'll give a brief background on the building the school was in. The first event happened when I was almost late for curfew. It was past midnight, and I was supposed to be in my room by 2 a.m. Instead of climbing 4 flights of stairs, which I usually did, I chose to take the elevator. After that night, I never took it again. I was standing at the elevator, so tired and ready to just collapse, when the lights in the hall suddenly went out in both directions. The only lights left on were the light right above me, the exit sign to the right, and the lit up elevator arrow button. I looked to my left, nothing but a dark hall. I looked to my right, and it seemed to be a dark hall as well. Right as I was going to turn my head away, I saw a slight movement. I squinted, trying to make it out in the dim light. This was before cell phones had flashlights, so my flip phone was useless here. I stared as an uneasiness crept over me. The exit sign at the end of the hall seemed dull somehow, like it was being blocked by something dark and transparent. Panic rushed over me. The movement I'd spotted was on the ceiling, right in front of that sign. I started to press the elevator button over and over as what looked like a black smoke or mist crept along the ceiling slowly towards me. By the time it was about 5 feet away, the elevator finally opened and I rushed in, jabbing the closed door button as the sliding metal doors slowly pulled together. Just as they closed, the mist or vapor or whatever it was had finally made it to the door and began to fall slowly to the ground. I stabbed my floor number over and over as if it would get me to my floor faster. I finally made it to my floor, past the creepy dark closet area and into my room. I was borderline hyperventilating, and my roommate thought I was crazy. The next instance was probably more terrifying than the first. We had weekly dish duty at this school. 2 people would be assigned every week to clean up dishes at the end of each meal. The week I was assigned went without a hitch for the most part, until the last night. The guy I was assigned to clean the kitchen with couldn't make it. The way it usually went, one person cleaned pots and pans and wiped down tables. The other did all the cups, plates, cutlery, bowls, etc. Since he wasn't able to be there and failed to find someone to cover for him, I had to do everything myself, being the little pushover that I was back then. Just to give a bit of layout to the room, it was big. There were lines of white fold-out plastic tables and chairs. The tables were in 5 rows of 3, end to end. The hall leads right into the room with no doors, just the open wall that was probably 10 by 10 feet. When you come in that opening, you see all the tables, and directly in the middle of the far wall were 2 double doors going into the kitchen. They were wood and had a round window on the top of them, face level for a normal height person. Directly to the left of this door was a hole in the wall, where everyone would sit their dirty dishes. On the other side of that hole was the dishwashing room for the dishes used by students. You would go through the doors, turn left, and boom, there's your dish pile for the night. The pots and pans were washed at the back corner of the industrial kitchen. When I started washing dishes for the night, there were still people in the eating area talking, doing homework and playing games. When I finished the pots and pans and came to the window room, there were less people, but still a fair amount. I started the rest of the dishes. By the time I was almost done, I saw the cafeteria lights shut off, which meant the last person was leaving the room. No big deal. I'd been in here in the dark tons of times, another half hour or so, and I was done with dishes. I looked at the clock. It was around 12:30. I was so ready to go to bed, but had to finish the tables. I heard something in the back of the kitchen fall. Upon investigation, it was a box of cookies. I picked them up, and that is when I began to feel eyes on me. I felt like I was being watched, and the unmistakable feeling of dread covered me. I set the cookies on the shelf they'd fallen from, and rushed out of the kitchen doors to clean tables. Windows lined the two side walls of the room, so the street lamps lit the tables pretty well as I quickly cleaned them. I was half through with the tables when I heard the cookies fall again. I stopped and listened intently for any other sounds. Silence. I slipped into the kitchen, holding my breath, and ran to the pantry. Sure enough, that box of cookies was on the ground again. I picked them up, this time laying them down so they wouldn't fall again, and rushed out of the kitchen, still feeling uneasy. I went back to my table, cleaning, and after a few minutes I froze dead in my tracks. There, through the window to the dish room, I saw it. A big, shadowy mass, standing there, watching. I'd seen shadow figures before, so this wasn't new to me. The thing that was new is the specific feeling I got as I stared into what I perceived to be its face. I walked out of the little room, as though to head into the kitchen. I just had to pep talk myself at this point. Okay girl, just wipe these last tables and you're good to go. You got this. Just keep your eyes down. I got to the last table and heard the cookie box again. Okay, there's nothing there. Just run, grab the box, throw it on the shelf and book it. That was my plan. I wiped the last table and turned to the door to put my plan into action, and my stomach felt like it dropped, slam into the floor. In the left door window I saw what was watching me. A shadowed face with two deep dark holes for eyes and a gaping mouth. I screamed bloody murder and booked it to my room. I didn't even put my cleaning supplies away. I flew up those 4 flights of stairs faster than I ever had. I thought for sure it would follow me. My roommate wasn't there this evening, so I threw on the lights as I slammed the door and started to sob uncontrollably. I slept with every light on that night and made sure to never stay out of my room after nightfall again. The last event, in my opinion, wasn't as bad as those two. I still felt uneasy in certain parts of the building and like I was being watched. Specifically in the hall, the downstairs bathroom, the laundry room, just to name a few. But nothing of substance really happened in those places. The last event was in my room. There were intercoms in every room that were no longer in service. We knew that they didn't work, but one evening I heard a woman's voice coming out of ours, followed by an elderly male-sounding voice. They were having a bit of an argument. She kept saying something about him needing to take his medicine, and he was refusing. This conversation carried on about 30 seconds, then static and silence. I shrugged it off and kept on about my business. After the voices, I started to dig into what this building used to be, before they made it into a ministry school. It was a nursing home. The conversation I heard could have been between a nurse and a patient that lived here. Not only was this place a nursing home, it has some kind of historical connection to the Freemasons. When the renovation crew was getting it ready to turn the building into a school, they knocked out a bottom floor brick wall that was crumbling. Some of the bricks had the Freemasons' insignia on them. They piled the bricks and began laying new ones when a van stopped at the edge of the property, and a group of 10 or so middle-aged and elderly people walked to the pile and each took one brick with the symbol on it and climbed back into the van and drove off. The man who told me about this said they seemed like they were in some kind of trance or something. Blank stares, chanting something he couldn't distinguish. He said it was the most terrifying thing he's witnessed. Before this building was a nursing home, it was a meeting and living place for Freemasons. I'm not sure of everything that went on there, but something happened to give it all the dark and ominous goings-on. When I graduated, I never stepped foot in that building again. It is now out of business. A lot of paranormal things have happened to me since this, but this is the haunting experiences that I had at my Christian ministry school. My school is definitely haunted. I don't want to say the name just in case anyone here got accepted in or looking into it. Anyways, I had heard some stories about the school, but not a lot, just for the same reason that the school doesn't want to scare away any potential students. My first experience was when I was sitting down in the student lounge, and I was studying, when I felt like I was being watched. So I looked up and I saw a shadow across from me, and it suddenly rushed towards me, and I just froze. I then picked up all my stuff and threw them in my backpack and walked out as fast as I could. Another was when I was in the bathroom alone and heard the door from the stall next to me open. I looked under to see if I could see feet, but I didn't see anything, just the door closed. My favorite experience was when I volunteered to check in students to go into the school dance. I was outside, taking a break, when I heard a little child's voice say, "Excuse me," and I thought, who brought a kid here? So I turned around, and no one was there, just some guys leaving the dance. So I moved spots and proceeded to scroll through my phone again, when I heard, "Excuse me," again. I turned around, and no one was there. All of these experiences happen around the original older buildings of the school. The first building that you see when you come into the school is not in use, so it has broken windows, locked gates and doors. I would always walk by that building to get to my car, and I always saw people in the windows. There is a gated hallway that is very dark, but you can kind of make out what's inside when you get close to the gate. I saw people standing at the end of the hallway. All of them were still. I also heard a giggle and a whimper when I was on my way to class. Sometimes, my friends and I would hear a scream of a woman around 7 to 8 p.m. while we were in class. As soon as we would hear it, we would peek out the window, but no one would be there. The original old main building was built like a maze. I and other people have had this feeling of being trapped, and it's just creepy inside. These are not all, but some of the stuff I have seen and heard at school. I was 16 years old and already at boarding school for roughly 5 years. My boarding school was situated in buildings that were originally used as a convent for priests and was also used as a graveyard in the Middle Ages. It has now been around for over 170 years as a school, going through 2 world wars, during which it was also used as a field hospital by the German army. Now, the thing you should know about the boarding school is that it was located in 2 large buildings, separated by a large playground. The boarding school itself was located on the top floors of each building, separated by 3 floors to reach the ground floor. I didn't have good grades that year, and was moved over to the other building of the boarding school, with the junior years, to be under a stricter routine with longer study hours. We always had about 1 hour and 15 minutes every evening to relax and spend time with friends after studying. For that, there was a large basement with a small TV room, with a bar and a gigantic room with pool tables and kicker tables. The thing about the gigantic room was that it only had a single light switch, and it was connected to the school's theatre and dancing room. of which the doors were always locked and its light always closed. Besides that, there was also a door that was always locked and supposedly connected the two buildings on the school's premises with a tunnel. Now, that evening, I went down to the basement directly after studying, taking along my phone charger. It was a pretty uneventful night, and at the end of it, I went up the stairs, going up 3 floors, finally reaching my room. All of a sudden, I realized that I forgot my charger in the basement and ran up to the supervisor who gave me the keys so I could go down to the basement. Once I was descending the 3 floors to reach the basement, I started to get this eerie feeling, like I was being watched. The feeling got even worse once I realized that if I would scream, nobody would hear me, as there were 3 empty floors between myself and the boarding school. Once I reached the basement level, I was calm again, unlocking the first door and opening the second one. As I slowly opened the second door, it felt as if the darkness in the gigantic room was extremely thick, as if it would swallow me. I know it sounds weird, but that's how it felt. I switched on the lights and started making my way past the ping pong tables towards the back of the gigantic room, roughly 30 meters away from the door and the only light switch. As I made my way to the back, I was suddenly taken over by a massive sense of danger and terror. I felt as if I was being ambushed or led into a trap, and my heart rate skyrocketed. I quickly turned around and speed walked back to the door, when suddenly, all the ping pong tables were making extremely loud noises, as if people were slamming on them with their fists to stir up a fight. I started sprinting to the door in fear that someone might switch off the lights or close the door on me, and while I was getting closer to the door, the noise got louder and louder. Once I finally reached it, I switched off the light and slammed the door shut, and as soon as the door closed, the noise stopped. I quickly locked the door and ran up as fast as I could, as if my life depended on it, crashing into one of the supervisors making his way home at the end of the night. He asked me what was going on, as I was pale, sweaty, and shaking, and I told him what I experienced. Instead of trying to rationalize what happened, the first thing he said is that he experienced some scary things as well when he had to lock up the basement alone. He also told me to check with another supervisor to make sure nobody was down there. The other supervisor and I went down to the basement again and stopped at the locked door, trying to hear if someone was down there or if any student was messing around. We listened quietly and heard someone walking around. As soon as we opened the door, the noise stopped, and we turned the lights on, but nobody was there. Nevertheless, the back doors of the dancing room and theater were wide open. To this day, I get chills thinking back to this experience. Nobody could have been down there with me without me noticing it, nor can I explain away the slamming noises coming from the ping pong tables and pool tables. It's an experience that has never left me, and although I tried to rationalize it, it is haunting me in a way. What could it have been is what I am wondering now. My mum is convinced that the boarding school she works at is haunted. Honestly, I am too. There's multiple instances of paranormal happenings. I'll write them all down. She was driving with one of her co-workers, and they were passing this field, and she said she saw this lady in a black cloak in the middle of the night. They reversed the car to get another look, and she's gone. Co-worker, I think the one from before, saw the lady in black in the pool house. Someone heard kids playing in the pool in the middle of the night. They went to check and found it empty. Her friend had windows randomly open, She'd go and close them, and they'd open again. All of a sudden, the room bursts open and papers go everywhere. In one of the dorms, my mum says she saw this lady in a nightgown walking between rooms. She also said when she was in the dorm alone one time, the door sensors just randomly went off. They have sensors on the doors, so like if a kid tries to run away. Her friend was walking somewhere and saw someone waving from one of the dorm windows. Turns out there's no group in there, so nobody was in the dorm at the time. One of the buildings used to be a house, and in the living room the old owner used to smoke cigars. You can still smell them when you go in the room. Same friend, I think, who saw the waving person, used to have dreams about this little boy on a tricycle, only to find out that the old owner of the property used to visit when he was a child and ride around on a tricycle. I'm sorry, there's so many, I literally was only going to type the first two. Returning from breakfast at a lodge in Yellowstone, my son and I came upon a man who was photographing a bison that was walking through the parking lot. We decided to take a closer look ourselves. While my son was beholding the beast, park workers walking on the other side of the lot suggested we give the animal a little more room. I thought that was reasonable. As I turned back to gather my son, I saw that I was too late. He was running directly for me with the bison in pursuit. Not thinking, I started running directly for him. The bison intercepted before I did. It lowered its horn and ripped a hole in his t-shirt and gave him a nasty abrasion on his back. Fortunately, my son was short enough and light enough to avoid being hooked and thrown. It was then that I grabbed him and immediately turned right. Chance would have it that someone left a cabin door open. I ran past the beds and into the bathroom, expecting our friend to follow. After hearing nothing for a minute or so, I cracked the bathroom door open, only to find Buff still on station. He eventually decided to wander off. We then had the opportunity of meeting most of the rangers within a mile of us. My son's sense of humor didn't return for quite some time. Alright, so I was coming back from my vacation in a car. My dad wanted to pee. There was no bathroom, so he went behind a tree. After that, he felt like going to poop, so he went further in. When he finished, as he was coming back, he stepped on a branch, and it probably hit a beehive, and literally, they all went after him. He went running back to the car, opened the door and screamed, "Do something." I was in the car for like 5 seconds, trying to process what just happened, and when I was doing that, the bees went into the car. My mum, my brother and I went running in a straight line for our dear lives. I was the only one with a phone, and I was actually barefoot, so I also had to be careful where I was stepping. My dad went in the opposite direction. The bees were on our hair and our ears. It was terrifying. When we got all the bees off us, we were screaming for help until one car stopped, and they took us to the hospital. That's when I saw my dad, nearly passed out on the side of the road, with a man blowing all the bees off with a blanket. When we arrived, my dad was in a critical state. His throat was closing. He was pallid, eyes wide open. I will never forget that face. Thankfully, they gave him a bunch of medicine. He had a tube on his pee-pee for the pee, and an adult diaper because he couldn't stand up. But they transferred him to another hospital. And on the way to the other hospital is when I started to feel terrible. Couldn't drink a sip of water without vomiting all over the place. I was only one night in the hospital. My dad is way better now and he can actually talk. He's still in the hospital for observation. They were actually putting him in intensive care, but he got better, and they moved him into intermediary care. And he got even better. Now he's just in a normal room. He'll be fine, but this was definitely one of the worst and scariest days of my life. This is one of the craziest turns of events in my life. Walking home when I was 17 from my friend's house after crashing at his place. About a 1.5 mile walk. 2 dogs run up. I take out my headphones to say hi. The boxer breed attacks me, knocks me into a ditch on the side of the road. I look up in time to see him lunge at me. I put my arm up and get scratches all over it. Dog latches onto my leg. I kick it in the face multiple times till he lets go. A car has seen this happening, honks the horn for me to dive in. Back door opens and I dive in. Car full of Jehovah's Witnesses coming back from church. I had landed into the laps of 3 ladies. One tells me that we went to elementary school together. I say hi, but please get me to the ER. I'm bleeding pretty bad. They watch the dog go back to the house, the owner letting him inside. I call my mum and let her know. She doesn't believe me, so I tell her I'll meet her at the ER. Get wheelchaired into the ER. Mum comes in and freaks out. I have a big bite on my leg, scratches bleeding on my arm. Takes 6 of those saline cleaning sprays to clean it up. Cops are called. I give a statement. We go back to the house. Owner answers and says that Hannibal would never do that. Yeah, the dog was named Hannibal. Hannibal lunges towards me when he sees me. Gets put back inside. Cop says,
Yeah, I've seen enough.
we are going to court because owner doesn't want to pay damages and medical bills. Apparently, they had a breeding license and didn't want to lose it. I feel slightly bad and don't want the dog to be put down. And if they are poor, this could ruin the owners. Cop comes to my house day before the trial. Apparently, he checked the place out and they had about 6 boxer breed dogs in an enclosure of about 15 by 15 foot cage. They've been selling the dogs to a dude in New York who apparently has been a person of interest in a dog fighting ring. Now I'm pissed. Bitch is gonna pay. So yeah, went to court, got paid. Her operation got shut down, lost her license, etc. Never found out what happened to the New York guy. But I feel like I did something good. So, when I turned 18, legal drinking age in Australia, my friends and I used to go drink regularly at this sports bar. It was connected to a pokies place, slot machines, and a TAB, a place to place bets on horse racing, etc. I explain all this because from reading a lot of stories from other countries, I realize maybe we don't do things the same way you all do internationally. Anyway, this sports bar was basically round back of this larger establishment, and next door to it was a large private high school campus. One night, me and my cousin, actually my step-cousin, but we were a hell of a lot closer than any of my real cousins, we were drinking jugs of beer at said sports bar. My memory is a bit hazy, but I'm pretty sure it was summer, and for whatever reason, it was just the 2 of us. I was into sculling beer at the time, hence the jugs, so we were pretty smashed. He suddenly gets a bit nostalgic for his high school years, and asks me if I want to go wander his old high school. He is a year older than me, so maybe that's why. Being a public school boy who never had seen his school, I say why not. I was always up for an adventure. So we head out to the neighbouring property that is and was his old high school. We jump the gate and start walking up this unnecessarily long driveway leading up to the school. These are drunken memories, so I actually have no idea if this was the main entrance or whatnot. I just remember a long, asphalted driveway with a heap of trees lining it. As we are walking along, we see this long-ass stick up ahead, but as we get closer, we notice through our drunken haze that it seemed to be moving. Then, we hear this sharp hiss and notice that this long-ass stick is charging right for us. We sober up enough to notice that it is a huge brown snake. For non-Australians, this might not sound so terrifying, but where I'm from, it's drilled into you that you don't mess with brown snakes. They're actually one of Australia's most venomous snakes, and this one was headed right for us with purpose. These snakes are aggressive, live in populated areas, and can drop a man in minutes. All according to a website I just looked up to make sure I'm not talking shit. Anyway, me and Cuz, realizing pretty quick how much danger we were in, hightailed it out of there. I'm pretty sure we were screaming like schoolgirls, but the memory's a bit hazy. To be honest, there's no way to tell how close it was to getting to us. We may have been in real danger, or it may have just been trying to intimidate us. We will just never know. But I'm pretty sure it was a close call. And also, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. I almost had my ankles broken by a hungry pig a few years back on a farm. I was warned by my boss not to be even a few minutes late feeding him, and his wife promptly lifted her skirt to the knees to show me this horrible roped scar that was nearly a foot long. Apparently, that was how they learned he was potentially deadly, but they ran a rescue farm for unwanted animals, so... The only day they were all out of town, I was swarmed with their army of ducks in the inner barn on my way to the pig pen with the food. I had to tiptoe around these feathered jerks that absolutely weren't afraid of being stepped on at all, and it genuinely sucks to be an anxious, empathetic animal lover, because fuck. I finally got to the pig pen and shut the door, which took a second with the ducks trying to shove through. And when I turned away from the door, I had maybe 2 seconds to process the giant pig barreling at me with his head twisted to the side and his jaws open, aimed at my ankle. And the nightmare incarnate was screaming that movie-style pig scream. Nah, I literally launched at and climbed the walls of the barn with a bucket of feed still in the crook of my arm. And all those marvelous panic thoughts were reminding me that pigs will eat people if they fucking want to. And then I remembered the bucket and dropped it. I slipped through the door with more ducks shoving, but frantically and probably a lot less kindly. And I plopped down on the nasty floor and thanked my lucky stars. So, brace yourself. This one is weird. I used to travel for hospital work. Super fun, highly recommend it. Usually 13-week contracts. One contract I was in Honolulu, Hawaii, which was amazing. I swam daily and hiked a lot. One such hike, I decided to go up the mountain right behind the city. When you're on Waikiki Beach, look directly inland. That big mountain that's almost always got cloud cover and a rainbow. That's what I climbed. On the way back down, I came across a mother hen and about 6 chicks. Like chickens. In the jungle. Totally out of left field. I didn't press, as they took off into the woods. So I went to work and asked some of my co-workers. They responded, "Oh, those are jungle fowl. Don't mess with them." Jungle fowl? Come on, man. I know they're feral chickens, but like, I grew up with chickens. We used to have roosters too. They'd protect the hens from foxes and raccoons. Problem was, they'd protect the hens from us too. We used to have a rooster we literally named Nightmare. I can handle a chicken, even an angry one. Next hike, I decide I'm going to Manoa Falls by taking a crazy way out of the way route. Total hike length was 12-ish miles. Roughly halfway through the hike, I run into some switchbacks going up a steep hill. I reach the top and I see him. A rooster and his flock of hens. They're all crossing the path behind him. And he looks at me and gets this "it's go time" look. He charges right at me. He's not too big, so I'm like, yeah, whatever. When a rooster attacks, they try to scratch you with these spurs they grow out of the backs of their feet as they fly right at you. So you kind of push them off and they get the message and give you right of way. At least, that's how it should go. This guy kept coming at me, relentlessly. So I start backing off, getting away from the hens, so he'd feel less threatened. But he still kept coming. We fought backwards, down 3 layers of switchbacks, for what felt like half an hour. I'm sure it was only a few minutes. And finally, I get to a point where I'm thinking I'm going to have to kill this thing to get it off my case. And something strange happened. The very moment I decided this, he suddenly stopped. We sort of stood there, looking at one another for a moment. Then he kind of gives a like, yeah, that's right. And he runs off up the hill, leaving me all scratched up. So I sat there for a few to give them some space, and decided that since I'm halfway through, I might as well finish the hike. On the way, I saw other hikers look at me, to which I responded, "Oh man, don't mess with the jungle fowl." This happened to me in the Gold Coast, Australia. It was around 2003, I believe. My family and I were visiting one of the many beautiful beaches for the day, and at the time were quite avid open water swimmers. As the beach was very busy that day, we wandered a little further south and found a nice quiet spot. It was a little ways back from the beach itself. The water flowed via a narrow stream from the ocean and opened up into a very deep inlet. We spent a few hours paddling on the shoreline, enjoying the peace and quiet. Perhaps we should have stopped to wonder why we were the only people enjoying this particular swimming spot. After a while we stopped for some lunch, and after finishing a nice feed, we returned to the water again. My mother and I, being quite the fitness fanatics at the time, decided we would challenge each other to a race across the inlet. So off we went. About halfway across, I started feeling kind of wrong. I can't explain what I felt in that moment. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. I just felt like I needed to get to that shoreline. I'm not sure if my mother felt the same thing or if she was just taking our race a little too seriously, but her pace quickened too. When we got to the other side, we climbed up onto the shore, ready to start the walk back around to where we left the rest of the family. We were talking, laughing, when suddenly my mother fell silent, and her gaze fixed upon something up ahead. I followed her gaze and noticed a sign that had not been visible from the other side where we had been swimming. I felt my body tense up as I read the sign. Bull sharks inhabit this inlet. Swimming strictly prohibited. A cold fear washed over me. For those of you unaware, bull sharks are among the most aggressive species of shark. Most sharks will stay away from you, being very shy creatures by nature. Bull sharks, however, are extremely territorial and are far more likely to rip you apart entirely unprovoked. 2 weeks later, I read in the paper that an 80-year-old man was killed in a bull shark attack, swimming in that exact same spot. It haunts me to this day, thinking back to that moment, thinking how easily that death could have been us, thinking how very probable it is that it was almost us. The two of us, flailing atop deep, dark water, dozens of pairs of beady black eyes staring up at us, any one of them ready and waiting to grab us without a second's hesitation and drag us down into the depths. Looking back, I cannot believe we actually went out there. Yet, there we were, helpless, exposed and vulnerable, without a clue in the world. Absolutely no idea what was down there. So, I've had a lot of jobs in my time. Didn't really see the point of higher education when I was younger, so I didn't really do a lot of glamorous jobs. Kind of regret that now at times, but you just gotta keep going and see how it all turns out. Keep adapting, it's all experience. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't, but at least I have some interesting experiences to talk about. Anyways, one of these many jobs on my resume was as a door-to-door salesman, or as my dodgy direct marketing company called us, a direct sales consultant. It was pretty sus. Supposedly we worked on behalf of a charity, the Heart Research Institute from memory. So we could take donations in a donation tin, as well as sell questionable goods. Reason why this was good was that we could try to sell to residential areas, as well as commercial and industrial. If we were just door-to-door salesmen without the charity, we wouldn't be able to do as such. I used to work 60 hours a week and make barely $200 to $400 a week, all while paying my own travel costs. But I don't know, I think for the life experience I got from it, it was kind of worth it. It definitely helped my social skills and put some points into my speech skill. I only lasted 6 months, but it felt a lot longer. 1 month, we were to work in this kinda not so safe area, if I'm putting it lightly. We were given territories to work every week, and this month, it was sunshine in St. Albans. Don't know what it's like now, but back then it was real rough. I knew people out that way from all the parties and raves I used to go to, so whilst I was apprehensive, I wasn't too worried. Plus, I drove, so we wouldn't be stuck using public transport after dark. Anyways, here I am, clearing my territory, going house to house. We generally worked in pairs, clearing blocks in alternate directions. So I'm going along, when I come to this house with a high sheet metal fence. I go to the gate and notice it has a "Beware of the Dog" sign scratched out. I look through the gap in the gate and notice that further back there is another cage-type gate leading to the backyard. Behind this gate is 2 to 3 tough-looking pit bulls. I guess this is why the sign was scratched out, so as not to draw attention to them, as they were either illegal, banned, or heavily regulated at the time. So being satisfied with my assessment, I let myself in and head towards the front door with my goods. As I get to the steps leading up to the cement front porch, I hear a low growl from in front of me. Then, to my horror, I see this pit bull slowly stand from its bed next to the front door and make its way towards me, growling all the while. Not like just an intimidation growl either. There was a definiteness to it. I started backing away slowly, knowing not to run, mumbling something stupid like,
we can work this out. I'm leaving. All the while, this dog continues to advance on me. I suddenly turn, ever so slightly, and then there is this explosion of action, noise, and pain. The dog lunged at my leg and took a bite. I managed to disengage somehow, and jumped up to cling to the railing that circled the front porch. All the while, the dog is barking and snapping at me. Luckily, the owner was home and comes out to see what the commotion was. I don't really remember the next part, but next thing I know, I was in his house with him apologizing and offering me a beer to calm my nerves. Being fairly shaken up, I take it. And he proceeds to ask me about what I was doing there and what I'm selling. So weirdly, I go into my sales pitch, and he proceeds to make a fairly generous donation to my charity tin. The owner then goes on to explain that I got off lightly. The dog in front was a coward, and would only attack someone if they turned their back. I turned slightly to the left, so it took its opportunity, but didn't latch on for the same reason. He keeps trying to offer me more beer, even weed, but I had to drive over an hour back at the end of the day, with the people I was responsible for, so I declined. After retelling this story to a coworker, they told me that he was only so nice because of the illegality of the dogs and how much trouble he'd be in if someone found out. I was in too much shock to even think about it at the time. I got away pretty lucky with only a hole in my suit leg, some scratches, and a great story to share. So, to any of my fellow direct sales consultants out there, if you see a gate with a "Beware of the Dog" sign scratched out, yet there are obviously dogs still there, just skip the house. You might not get off as lucky as I did. I'll preface these stories with a little bit of information about the area I live in the United States. I was born in Texas and moved to an area known as the Hill Country when I was about 3. We lived out in the middle of nowhere, and the closest little town was 30 minutes away. This town consisted of a schoolhouse, a post office, a general store, and a volunteer fire department. As you were driving through, if you blinked, you would miss it. There weren't even any stoplights, and the entire area consists of summer camps and game ranches. To get to the big city, you had to drive about an hour away, and it was still a pretty small city compared to what most people consider a large city. The area has a wide variety of different species of animals that can and will kill you if you are unlucky enough to cross paths with them on a bad day. It is not uncommon to see rattlesnakes, coyotes, mountain lions, feral hogs, javelina's hogs, cottonmouth snakes, copperhead snakes, and a myriad of insects that can cause pain and death. People who live in the country know not to pick up anything off the ground with your hands, and to carry a rifle or gun on you when you are going out into the forest or fields. And if you have snake boots, wear them. But we also get careless at times, because when you grow up living with these animals around you, it isn't hard to get jaded and forget. My family's property was a 12-acre ranch where we grew, raised, and hunted our own food. We had a really nice garden, a large chicken coop, goats, rabbits, horses, and multiple deer feeders on the property. The property housed my nuclear family, Mum, Dad, my older brother and myself, and my maternal uncle and his 2 sons, and my grandparents. We all lived on different parts of the property, but we all helped to take care of the animals and gardens. The first experience I had with one of nature's fastest killers was at the age of 7. One of my chores every morning was to feed and water the chickens and rabbits. The chickens were housed in a large coop that was stationary. There was a fence around it where we would let the chickens loose to run around and collect bugs. We had a large billy goat along with a rooster in a large structure to scare away foxes and protect the hens. Inside the coop, we built wooden bleachers that sloped up against the south wall of the building. In front of that was their food and water holders.
Anyone who has ever had lots of animals will probably know the waterers and feeders I am talking about. They kind of look like a cone. Ours were blue, where the base is a large circle. It then had a metal that ran up to a point at the top where you could pour food down, and it would slowly feed the animals as they ate from the trough at the bottom. There was a large ring at the top to pick it up and move it when necessary. My routine was quite simple. Pick up the waterer, drag it outside, dump the old nasty water out because chickens will roost up on top and poop in their own water, then drag it back inside with the watering hose and fill up the water again. I let it run while I went and filled the feeder up with chicken feed and gave the goat his feed in a separate bowl. I did this every single day before going to feed the rabbits. On this day, I went through the main gate, and as I walked up to the coop, I noticed that all the animals were as high as they could get in the wooden bleachers at the back of the building. I unlatched the main door and called them to come out, but none of them budged. This was really unusual. They usually waited at the door and rushed out as soon as it was opened up. Being 7, I didn't quite understand the warning signs. I knew when the woods were quiet that it meant there was a large predator around. But it was in our chicken house. There was nothing dangerous in there. Giggling to myself about how weird the animals would be, I went over and petted my favorite hen, then the goat, and gave a pat to a few of the others before picking up one of the hens and putting her down on the ground to see if they would all run out into the yard. To my surprise, the hen freaked out and began flapping and jumping her way up onto the wooden perches again. At this point, I just shrugged and hopped down onto the dirt floor. I don't know if it was the vibration of my feet hitting the ground or the fact that I landed right in front of the waterer, but I began to hear a sound I had never heard before. Movies have very distinct sounds for things. A gun cocking, thunder, a sword unsheathing, the sound of a rattlesnake. None of them are accurate, but we associate these sounds with the corresponding event because that is the sound Hollywood has implanted into our brains. So let me tell you that the sound of a rattlesnake is nothing like the movies. The sound I heard was more like when you open a Coke bottle and the built-up pressure starts escaping. It was so close to this sound that I began looking around at my feet to see if I had landed on something pressurized. It didn't make sense, of course. This was the chicken coop, but to my 7-year-old brain, it was the closest thing I could relate to the noise. After thoroughly searching in the intermediate area where I landed, I couldn't find anything. Perplexed, I realized that I really needed to get done with my chores, because I had even more after this, and I didn't want to get in trouble for dawdling. Moving over to the waterer, I grabbed the big ring on the top and lifted it up. The bottom of the waterer is about the size of an adult bike tire in circumference. It was big, especially for a 7-year-old girl with limited upper body strength, and it weighed a lot even before adding water to it. I had to use all my wimpy body to pick it up and move it over the door frame to the yard before I could drag it the rest of the way to the water hose. As soon as I lifted it up, however, I stopped dead in my tracks. One of the largest rattlesnakes I've ever seen was curled up the entire circumference of the base of the waterer. The sound made sense now. The head pointed towards me in a striking pose as it coiled in on itself. I didn't know what to do. Normally I was told to jump as far away as possible and then run as fast as you can. If you could jump up onto something that was high enough, that was also an option. Or if you had something to pin the head down with, you could try your luck with that as well. All these ideas shot through my head lightning fast, and all were dismissed immediately. It was taking every ounce of my strength to keep the waterer held up. There was no way I could jump or run with it. I considered jumping backwards onto the wooden rungs that lined the back of the coop, but again, I knew I would never make it holding the massive object filled with water. I know it is cliche to say that it seemed like forever, but was only a few minutes. But that is sort of how it went down. Honestly, I couldn't tell you how long I was standing there, staring at this rattlesnake as it continued to coil endlessly in front of me. Eventually, I made a decision, one that probably saved my life and the lives of some of our livestock that day. I dropped the waterer, just let it go, watched as it landed flat on top of the enormous snake, and I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't close the door to the coop or the gate to the yard. I just took off like a bullet. That may have been one of the fastest times I have ever ran up to my grandparents' house and directly into my grandfather's arms. I was bawling, screaming and pointing in the direction of the chicken coop. It took him a few minutes to understand what I was saying before he looked me over for bites. In all my blubbering, he couldn't understand if I had been bitten or if a snake had eaten all our chickens. Because of the commotion, my grandmother came out of the house as my granddad went into the house to grab his rifle before heading down to the chicken coop. I didn't dare go back down there. I was terrified it would kill our animals, kill me, or kill my grandfather. But a few minutes later, we heard a single shot, and after a few minutes of agony, my grandfather came strolling back up the hill with a snake over a large branch. My grandfather was a 6'3" gentle giant, and this snake, at arm length for him, doubled over a branch, reached the ground. It was as big around as my mum's arm, and the head was as large as my little hand. It was still coiling around, trying to grab anything with its tail, its body squeezing the branch. I thought it was still alive at first, even though I knew they continued to move after death, and I screamed thinking he was bringing it up to us. My grandma calmed me down, and after it stopped flopping about, I got to see exactly how long it was. To this day, it is still one of the largest rattlers we have ever killed on the property. After this, it was no longer my job to feed and water the chickens, and I was too terrified collecting eggs from the coop. My wife used to work at the Great Wolf Lodge in Mason, Ohio. She worked third shift at the front desk for 5 years, and things would happen there constantly. Many times I would take her to work and hang out in the lobby until she got off, instead of making the long drive back home and then back to get her in the morning. Employees she worked with would share stories with me all the time of things that happened to them or to guests. One room in particular that seemed to be the most haunted had reports from guests that something in the middle of the night would jump on their beds. One day, the bathtub overflowed and the water leaked down into the basement. When they checked the room, nobody had been in there, and the room hadn't been rented. It seemed as if a lot of the things that happened there either happened in the lobby or on the first floor. The lobby and the main floor are actually the second floor. Every night they had to print a report and get it from the main office on the first floor. My wife went down the stairs, and while she walked, the elevator started following her from the lobby to the first floor. When she got down there, the doors to it opened and nobody was on it, nor was there anybody waiting for it. Another night, she had got the report and was waiting at the doors for the elevator. Behind her, she heard a man say,
"You never asked my name."
She spun around and nobody was there. She walked down the halls and found nobody with her anywhere. One night, she got a call from the office, but nobody was supposed to be in there, and it was locked at night. The night shift supervisor went down to check it out with security and found the door to be still locked and nobody in there. That happened quite a bit. One time, he came back upstairs from checking, and as soon as he reached the top of the stairs, a phone that sat at the host station at one of the restaurants there rang, so he picked it up. The extension it called from was the office, and he heard nothing but dead air. Pardon the pun. A religious man and skeptic, he just laughed it off, as he always did, and hung up the phone with a shrug. Another night, she got a call from an extension she didn't recognize, and when she answered it, she heard nothing but dead air. Not even her supervisor knew the extension. After hanging up, she decided to call the extension back, and the phone in front of her supervisor, who sat right next to her at the desk, rang. He picked it up and they confirmed that it was her that called, except it wasn't his extension at all. And upon further investigation, they found that extension did not exist anywhere in the hotel. One night, I had to use the bathroom, so I walked down the hall, off the lobby to the bathroom. As I got to it, I looked up and saw someone walking in ahead of me. All I saw was their leg, from about the knee down. It appeared to be a white guy, red shorts, white socks and red shoes. I was only a few feet away, yet nobody had been in front of me in the hall. And as I went into the bathroom, I didn't see him. So I looked in each stall and found I was alone. There was absolutely nowhere for him to go. Another night, sometime around Halloween, they had the lobby all decorated and there was a DJ booth. Right around 4:45 in the morning, it began playing a song really loud and scared the hell out of all of us. The supervisor went to shut it off, and after he did, he informed us that it had been off when he came in. I mean, it had been off the whole time I was there too. The place is right next to King's Island, which is also supposed to be haunted, and ghost hunters did a show from there once and found nothing. I'm not sure why they never bothered going to the lodge next door to hunt. They'd probably turn up all kinds of things, as stuff happens regularly there. Maybe the company doesn't want that kind of publicity. I guess I ruined that. Should you ever happen to go do some hunting, things seem to happen mostly between 3 and 5 in the morning. So I don't know whether this was a ghost. I don't know what it was. I only know that it scared me and my friend badly. This is going to be a long one, apologies in advance. A few months back I went on holiday with a couple of friends to celebrate my hen do. I ended up sharing a hotel room with my maid of honor. We spent the first couple of nights exploring the town and drinking a little too much, so that by the time we got back to the hotel, we fell asleep pretty much as soon as we crawled into bed. The third night rolled around and we all felt pretty rough, so we decided to take it easy. We had a nice meal, no booze, and watched comedy stuff on her tablet until it was time for bed. I woke up abruptly at 2 a.m. with the feeling that something else was in the room with us. Telling myself not to be stupid, I opened my eyes and stared directly at a woman standing next to the bathroom door. The first thing I noticed about her was her black hair and her green with white polka dots shirt. This is important later. But the more I looked, the more I realized that she was all wrong. She was unnaturally tall, so much so that her head was level with the doorframe. The worst thing was her face though. The only way I can describe it is to say that it looked melted, but that doesn't do it justice. Her teeth were huge, protruding way out of her mouth. She was leaning towards me, beckoning me over to her and laughing. I couldn't hear the laugh, but I felt it. Now I'm going to pause here and say that I know what sleep paralysis is like. It's happened to me on and off since I was a very little kid. I wake up and can't move. I see stuff that shouldn't be there. This is not that. Firstly, I could move because initially I thought it was a weird dream remnant. I actually leaned towards her, trying to see better. Secondly, when I do wake up seeing weird things, They disappear as soon as I close and reopen my eyes. So I closed my eyes and opened them again. Closed them and opened them. Closed them and opened them. Every time she was still there. At this point, I lost it. Closed my eyes and screamed for my maid of honor to turn the light on. As soon as she flipped the switch, I turned to check and the woman was gone. I got out of bed and searched the bathroom, just to be on the safe side. And it was empty. I've never physically shaken from fear before, but by this point, I was trembling from head to toe and couldn't stop. While I was pacing the room, my maid of honor was lying on her bed, awake but struggling to open her eyes. This was weird in itself because, A, when she's up, she's up. I live in fear of sleeping in the same room as her because she's a light sleeper and won't be able to nod off again if I wake her. And B, she's a very protective friend, and under any other circumstances, if she heard me scream, she'd be at my side in a shot. Our conversation went something like this. Me, not wanting to sound stupid. I had a nightmare. "It's okay, sweetie. This hotel is just messed up." I saw a woman. At this point, my maid of honor sat bolt upright. "Don't." Green polka dot shirt. We stared at each other for a moment, then without saying anything else, grabbed some essentials and left the hotel. We went down onto the beach and walked through the seawater, then managed to find a bar that was still open. When we sat down with a pint each, we finally talked. When I screamed, I had woken my maid of honor up from a nightmare, in which a really tall woman with a melted face and huge teeth was pinning her down onto the bed and screaming into her face. The woman had black hair and was wearing a green shirt with white polka dots. We didn't calm down until I booked us a room at another hotel. We waited out the rest of the night in bars and cafes, and when our other friend finally woke up, we got him to accompany us back to our room so we could get our stuff and go. So that's my story. I still have to sleep with the lights on because I'm scared of what might be waiting for me if I wake up in the dark. Other interesting points to note. The hotel where this happened was the oldest in the city, having been built around 100 years prior. When I woke up, we were 2 hours into Halloween. Some people we have told this story to have suggested it might have been someone playing a Halloween prank, but the main door was locked from the inside, and it was also really stiff and made a horrendous noise whenever it was opened. There's no way anyone opened it without us hearing. The only other entrance was the balcony door, 2 floors up, covered with a metal shutter that could only be operated from the inside. Since this incident, me and my maid of honor have started having the same nightmares. Not every night, and not even about the woman we saw, but once a month or so, we'll have the same horrible dream, and it's different each time. So I travel a bit for work, and have stayed in lots of hotels, and I try to stay in hotels that are presumed haunted. So this time I had a quick in and out job to go do field measurements in Las Vegas at another hotel lobby. No big deal. However, that hotel I was working on was booked, so the Planet Hollywood wasn't, and it was across the street. Plus, it was cheap. So I decided to stay there on this trip. At the time, I didn't know anything about the history. No night ghost hunting, no town ghost tours, just in and out. The less time I'm in Vegas, all the better. So I check in, go to the room. It's a nice room with a comfortable bed, very clean and modern. Not my style, but whatever. Overall, I would stay there again. So I settle in, drop stuff off and head over to the job site to take measurements. So far, pretty normal and boring. Get done, get dinner, and grab some snacks for the night. Have a very early flight, so no partying, and they have the good stations for movie time. So I'm in the room, sitting, watching some Olympics, when I hear what sounds like someone putting the keycard into the slot, followed by trying the handle. Auto locks when you close the door, plus I put the dead latch on as well. It moves 3 times, then stops. I don't hear anything else and go back to watching TV, figuring someone came to the wrong door very commonly. So about 15 minutes go by and I hear the same thing again, but this time a bit harder. And then I hear what I think is whispering outside of the door. Can't hear what they are saying, but I can imagine. They try again and this time really hard, then nothing. Now, it's at that point I'm a bit nervous. But again, not a hotel rookie, and it happens a lot, so the Olympics is way more important. About another 15 minutes or so go by, and I hear it again, but softer, and almost like they're trying to sneak it open, but it still doesn't open. I also hear whispers, but I can't make it out. This time, I go up to the door to see if I can see out, but no peephole. Then I see the handle move a little, then back up. It does this again, and again it's not moving much, cause it's locked, but still enough where I'm a bit weirded out. So this time I yell out, "This room is taken," half thinking that I'd get a response of sorry or, "Hey, this is our room," etc. However, nothing. And at this point I realize I can't hear them leaving. But all day I can hear the footsteps of everyone else walking and talking as they pass by my room. So at that point I go over to the bed and sit down, thinking that's possibly the end of that. And either that or they'll bring a manager and we will sort it out. A couple of hours go by and now it is late. Not sure about the time, but Big Trouble in Little China is on, so I don't care anymore. The awesome movie deserves my complete attention. Then, I hear it again. Key goes in slot and handle turns. I get mad and rush the door, half expecting some drunk idiots trying to get in the room. And when I open it, nothing. I look both ways down the hall. Nothing. However, I can hear whispering, which I walk in the direction of and turn the corner. And there was nothing there. Now I get that tingle in my spine that I like when I have encounters or weird stuff happen. I go back to my room and as I'm in front of the door, I hear whispers again coming from behind me. I turn and look and nothing. Get inside and close the door, and as I walk away from the door, I hear it again. Card in slot and handle turns. Now, at this point, I was a bit unnerved, but if the Menja and Coronado taught me anything, I turned that into some fun. Unfortunately, I don't have gear except for my cell phone, which isn't really going to help. But I did want to show what the deal was. Jump on good old Google and look it up. Turns out, Planet Hollywood used to be the Aladdin, and then something before that. A couple of people died here, and the more I look, the more I realized that I may be on the side that had a couple of deaths, as well as some other stuff happen. Well, that made this trip a whole lot better, so busted out the cell phone recorder and tried to get the door, or whisper, either on camera or sound recording, which I'll upload if I see or hear anything if it looks juicy enough to do so. So the door did it a few more times over the night, and the whispers keep going throughout the night. And before you say the whispers are other people, there is a very distinct difference between what I was hearing and what it sounds like when the living walked down the hall. Plus you can hear and feel them walking. So the final thing that happened was, when I was in bed later, the wall that separated the bed area from the bathroom sounded like something being dragged across the floor. And then it sounded like the bathroom tub was running. I went into the bathroom and nothing was running. I sat back in bed and this time it sounded like it was coming from the wall, not the bathroom. It happened twice, then it stopped. After I left the hotel, I felt a little sad. A boring night turned into a hair-raising good time. Oh, And no, it doesn't make Las Vegas any better. However, the hotel was good, and the beds were comfortable, which I like. My wife and I run a small hotel in the UK. We have been on a few ghost hunts in the past, but not experienced anything. The hotel we own is Victorian in origin, but has been extended a few times. When we first moved in, around 6 years ago, we experienced a few things. Odd smells, things out of place, and one of our builders at the time saw someone go into a room, but upon investigation, no one was there. Nothing strange in the past 5 years though. This week, we have had a couple staying and we have been having chats in the bar in the evening about all sorts. The topic of ghosts came up and we exchanged our experience of ghost hunts and they of their experiences. She seemed to have quite a few stories, but I thought nothing of it at the time. 2 days into their week-long stay, the man left the bar to get something from his room. When he returned, he handed me the plastic lens cover of one of our emergency lights. He found it outside his room. There is an emergency light just outside their door. These lights are always on and run even if we have a power cut. The bulbs last years, but when they need changing, I always snap a little tab on the covers as they go really brittle. So I just thought to myself that it's one I've already broken and have perhaps glued it back on and it's finally given way. Thought nothing more of it until I went to bed and found 2 broken plastic tabs on the stairs leading to their room. I had hoovered earlier that day. The following day, or maybe the day after that, they were sat having breakfast in our restaurant, and she filmed a quick video of the restaurant to show her daughter. We have a life-sized model pirate sitting at a table in the restaurant. He is out of the way and faces the bar. From their table, they would be looking at the back of his head. He also has a brown hat on and his hair is black. Later that evening, she is looking at the video and looks really shocked. She gets him to take a look, and I can see the confusion in his eyes. They show me the video. She has filmed a sweeping shot of the restaurant, and as the camera passes the pirate, he appears to be looking right at them. It's not pixel perfect in any way, but certainly not brown black as the back of his head should be, but white, and the goatee beard is visible. This morning, just before they are due to be down for breakfast, he's calling me to come out of the kitchen. He tells me their TV has just fallen off the wall. Thankfully, they were in bed and no harm came to them. Now, these TVs have been mounted on brackets and screwed into the wall using proper plasterboard screws, and have been up for at least 4 years. Never have we had a problem. He tells me it seems strange that a TV falling didn't take out the shelf below it, or indeed the mirror directly under the TV. He says it's like it was pushed out of the wall. Anyway, after breakfast I give them the key to another room. They move their stuff and are happy. I go up to the room, and to be honest, I expected to find some damp plasterboard that had finally given up. The plasterboard that the TV bracket was on backs onto their shower. The plasterboard looks like new, and it looks like it's been ripped off the wall. This, of course, could be true, and they are lying to me, but they just don't seem the sort. Each of these things on their own is bad enough, but all 3 happening to the same guests in this week has just got me wondering. Any thoughts?